Chapter 1288. Previously, the gods thought that they could hide their plan to stall for time from Qin Guang. However, since both sides were facing each other and their strength was so strong, Qin Guang would be able to detect even the slightest change in the breathing rate of any god-emperor, let alone the slightest movement. How could they hide it from him? If they had come in person, with the realm and willpower of a god-emperor, Qin Guang would not be able to see through them no matter how powerful he was. However, since they were only projections, and because they were contaminated with the characteristics of humans, it would not be difficult for Qin Guang to see through their thoughts. Previously, Qin Guang was only concerned about the ancient well. Although the light beam was still sending away the low-level gods, it was only a minor detail. As long as the well was still there, the core and foundation of the realm in the cup would not be destroyed, and he would be able to leave safely with the human players. Qin Guang had slaughtered 999 deity emperors with a wave of his hand because both sides were enemies, and it was also something that Qin Guang had done in passing. Their delay was meaningless. However, now that the light beam had completely dissipated, this matter should have come to an end. However, when he saw the ancient well that was hidden by the gods reappear, he finally figured out why the gods were stalling for time. The coercion in the black smoke gave him a familiar yet strange feeling. It was familiar because he had felt a similar feeling from Colored Li's original body. It was strange because although the coercion seemed to be brewing and seemed weak, the momentum it contained was far stronger than Colored Li's. This meant that the power contained in the black smoke was far stronger than Colored Li's. However, Colored Li was already one of the strongest god emperors. It was much stronger than Colored Li, but its aura was similar to hers. Combined with the chaos peak that he had heard from the god emperors, the identity of the person represented by the 9 black smoke was obvious. It was Colored Li's father, the master god of chaos. Although Qin Guang had heard of this master god for a long time, he never thought that he would meet him face to face one day, and that he would come so suddenly and so quickly. Even if he really met the master god of chaos, Qin Guang felt that he should wait until he completed the test of the 3,000 worlds and became the real master of the heavenly Holy Grail. After that, he would become a god and kill his way into the endless heavenly realm as a king. Then, he would conquer billions of heavenly kingdoms with Colored Li and use the name of the master god of chaos to swindle people. In Qin Guang's eyes, the master god of chaos was Colored Li's father after all. However, after interacting with the many deity emperors, Qin Guang still had a deep feeling that these deities might not care much about kinship, even if they were just projections. It would be impossible for him to use the guise of a chaos master god to swindle others. However, Qin Guang originally thought that he wouldn't have to go against them. However, looking at the situation now, the master god of chaos did not come with good intentions. Qin Guang tried to blast the black smoke away with 2 moves. However, even though he had used all his strength, the force he exerted couldn't even get close to the ancient well. Instead, it hit an invisible wall that could not be seen by the naked eye. Then, it was like a clay ox entering the sea, unable to make any waves. It seemed that he could not stop the arrival of the master god of chaos. Qin Guang estimated the strength of the invisible wall in his mind. If he exerted all his strength and used a variant of the move just now, he might be able to break the invisible wall. However, who knew if there was another layer behind the invisible wall? If it was a blessing, it would not be a curse. If it was a curse, it could not be avoided. The arrival of the master god of chaos was definitely not to chat with him. It was very likely that he was ordered to kill the traitor, like those master god of chaos. Speaking of which, Qin Guang also found it funny. He was a good young man of the new era who grew up under the red flag. At worst, he picked up a holy grail, or at worst, he became the owner of the cup. How did he become the traitor, in the words of these master god of chaos? I have never entered the heavenly realm, and I have never become one of your people. So, who did I betray? Who did I betray? These chaotic thoughts did not last long in Qin Guang's mind. The 9 ancient wells changed again. The black smoke coming out from the mouth of the wells became thicker and thicker. Gradually, it even covered the light completely. At a glance, there was only a black mass. Qin Guang measured the volume of the black smoke in his mind. As he expected, there were at least 3 more layers behind the first invisible wall. Even if he went all out and broke the first layer, he could only stare at the other layers. Forget it. Let's see what the Master God of Chaos is capable of. Chen Guang focused his eyes and stared at the black smoke. However, he was secretly circulating his internal energy. His internal energy did not stop growing. Instead, it continued to grow. In addition, after killing the last 300 Master God Emperors, especially the 8 Master God Emperors led by Yu Ting, most of their source energy was assimilated by the transitional space. However, there was always some core energy that was absorbed into Chen Guang's body. Not only that, after the transitional space assimilated the energy left by the many Master God Emperors, the special energy mixed with the 4 types of energy was further strengthened. The speed at which the energy was forcibly poured into Chen Guang's body became faster. Whether Chen Guang was willing or not, he was now in a situation where his breath was also becoming stronger. The black smoke cloud became darker and denser. Although it still looked like a fog, Chen Guang, who was hundreds of meters away from it, could already feel a suction force. It was written in the physics textbook that gravity was everywhere. Even if 2 ping-pong balls were placed on a table, there would still be a gravitational force between them. It was just that the gravitational force was so small that it could be completely ignored. But now, Chen Guang was hundreds of meters away from the black cloud. The volume of the cloud was only a few thousand cubic meters. If he could easily feel the suction force, it could only mean that the density of the cloud itself had reached a very terrifying level. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was evolving into a black hole. What really affected Chen Guang was the pressure of the black cloud. At first, he could easily resist it. But as the power in the cloud became more and more solid, cold sweat gradually appeared on his forehead. He could not take it anymore, but there was nothing he could do. Chen Guang did not dare to float in the air anymore. Instead, he slowly landed on the ground. Previously, he had been using the azure real body that he had seen to measure the power of a god emperor. He had even imagined how powerful the Master God of Chaos was. But now, the Master God of Chaos did not show up at all. The overwhelming pressure seemed to freeze the time and space around him. Chen Guang finally realized that his previous imagination was so stupid and ridiculous. Even though the Master God of Chaos was only 1 level higher than the God Emperor, the difference between them was like heaven and earth. They were not on the same level at all. The difference between the Master God who incarnated the rule and the God Emperor who controlled the rule was simply the difference of dimensions. Master God of Chaos, what are you doing? Chen Guang, who was half buried in the ground, could not help but murmur to himself. At this moment, the black cloud suddenly dispersed and turned into a giant palm. It easily tore the invisible wall apart, and then crossed the void at lightning speed, grabbing Chen Guang hard. Chen Guang's eyes widened. There was no fear on his face, only helplessness. He thought that he could at least fight it. He did not expect that he would be defeated so quickly. He watched the black cloud turn into a giant palm. In his mind, he knew that he should avoid it. But when he really wanted to move, he found that he could not move at all. What was sealed was not only his body but also all the power in this transitional space. Of course, that included the new internal force in his body. He finally understood many things that he had not understood before. He was ambushed. Chapter 1289. From the beginning of the slaughtering world, the invincible Chu Feng had already fallen into a trap. This trap was not very profound. It was just an overt plot to trap him. Even if Chu Feng felt strange, he could not escape. In the slaughtering world, whether it was for himself or to protect Chu Zijin and Lu Fei, who were involved at that time, Chen Guang had to follow the requirements of the slaughtering world. In the end, Chu Feng transformed into a blood pigeon and went on a killing spree. Chen Guang had no choice. He could not control himself at all. After the slaughtering world died, the origin energy released by the divine emperors was absorbed by Chu Feng. Then Chu Feng let out a colorful fart. He could not resist it at all. After entering the jumping-off building world, many divine race members had died here one after another. However, most of them were small fries and couldn't enter Chen Guang's eyes. They didn't leave much origin energy behind. After entering the true martial domain, Chen Guang began to slaughter the divine emperors with his own hands. This was because the 4 divine emperors of the 4 deities temple were ignorant and took the initiative to provoke him. Later on, even after Chen Guang entered the 9th sacred city, he didn't take the initiative to attack the celestial race. When he started to search for the celestial race on a large scale, the celestial race had already hidden in the depths of the End of Thought Valley. Moreover, they had conveniently hidden the 9 ancient wells. After that, Chen Guang chased after the celestial race and faced 999 celestial emperors. Everyone's position was originally hostile. The other side seemed to want to take the ancient wells away. He and all the human players were trapped here. Of course, Chen Guang had no qualms about killing the Protoss. The Protoss would not close their eyes and wait to be killed. Naturally, a fight between the two sides was inevitable. As long as they fought, the result would be a fight to the death. Chen Guang did not care much about the lives of the Protoss. Once the Protoss died, their bodies and thoughts would naturally be reduced to origin energy. Then, they would be absorbed by Chen Guang invisibly. In addition, since he entered this transition space, he had been passively absorbing the mixed power in the air. These processes were irreversible and irresistible. Previously, Chen Guang felt that this was a good thing. After all, he would not truly die in the world in the cup. If he became stronger, it would be easier for him to deal with the God Emperor. However, the moment he was squeezed by the giant palm formed by the Master God of Chaos, Chen Guang clearly felt that he was very close to death. It was not the kind of death that could be resurrected, but the complete destruction of his soul. It was even more complete than death in reality. This was a trap through and through. Whether it was the absorption of the Divine Emperor's origin energy before or the absorption of this mixed energy after entering the transition space, there was only one fundamental purpose: to change the structure of his origin energy, to give his body divinity, to separate himself from the identity of the Master of the Holy Grail, and to take a step closer to the characteristics of the God race. Perhaps the mastermind's goal was to let Chen Guang indulge in the feeling of becoming stronger while lying down. Then he would suddenly realize that it was a trap. While killing him, he would feel regret in his heart. Chen Guang did not indulge in it. In fact, he had always been awake and alert, but it was of no use. The Master God of Chaos had only sent a hand across space and time, and it was already so powerful that Chen Guang could not resist it at all. The pressure on his body was getting stronger and stronger. Chen Guang did not struggle anymore. It was not that he had given up easily. Instead, although he had been caught like a fool from the beginning to the end, as if he did not resist at all, in fact, he had exerted all his strength, but it was to no avail. As the pressure of the giant palm continued to increase, from time to time, there was a creaking sound coming from Chen Guang's body. It was an indescribable pain. When the pain exceeded the extreme, he felt nothing at all. Chen Guang knew that this was probably because he was really going to die. However, the greatest pain did not come from his body, but from the depths of his soul. Liuli once said that Chen Guang was insensitive and had no respect for her, a God Emperor, and did not know fear at all. Chen Guang only thought that she was praising him for being brave and fearless. That was the truth. Although Chen Guang had always been an ordinary person, in his memory he had never been afraid of anything since he was a child. To put it bluntly, he was bold, boundlessly bold. There were very few people like this, or maybe there were none at all. It was probably because of the ancestors' protection that he could live to the age of 20. If it were someone else, he would have died a long time ago. However, it was different this time. For the first time, he felt fear. It was a trembling that came from the depths of his soul, and it even made him feel despair. Vaguely, there was a crisp sound of glass shattering. Suddenly, the first crack appeared on the surface of Chen Guang's body, which was far more solid than diamonds. He was using all his internal strength to resist the pressure. The crystallization of his body was because it was too hard. However, in the face of the giant palm of the Master God of Chaos, he was still helpless. As the first crack appeared, more and more cracks appeared on his body, like the spring grass after the rain. In an instant, they covered his entire body. The cracking sound became more and more intense. Accompanied by a loud bang, the invincible and omnipotent Qin Guang in the true force domain finally broke into countless pieces, and then turned into smoke and dust that dissipated in the air. At the last moment before he lost consciousness, perhaps the giant black palm had completed its task, Qin Guang finally saw the 9 ancient wells through the giant palm. The 9 ancient wells also dissipated with the wind, along with his body. Not only did the Master God of Chaos crush him to death with one palm, but he also killed 2 birds with one stone when he condensed this giant palm. He used up the power of the heavenly Holy Grail contained in the 9 ancient wells. Suddenly, a thought appeared in Qin Guang's mind. It was related to the dissipating light beam and the many low-level gods that were sent away. It turned out that he was mistaken, or that all of the gods had been deceived. That light beam was not a passage back to the endless divine realm. It was clearly a sacrificial ceremony, and the purpose of sacrificing more than 3 million gods was to provide the Master God of Chaos with the power of this palm. The 9 ancient wells were not a path to the next layer of the floating island. From the beginning, they were the core of the sacrificial ceremony. When the 9 ancient wells were combined, it was basically a divine weapon of the endless divine realm, called the 9 Immortals Peak. This 9 Immortals Peak was the residence of the Master God of Chaos in the endless divine realm. Each of the 9 floating mountains surrounding the Chaos Peak contained the lifetime essence of more than 100 God Emperors. God Emperors had a long lifespan, but the Master God of Chaos had an even longer lifespan. Over the countless years of the divine realm, countless powerful deity emperors had become the followers of the Master God of Chaos. However, they did not manage to become a Master God and died on one of the 9 Immortals Peaks on the path of searching for the laws. Most of their strength had been used up, but there would always be some remnants left on the 9 Immortals Peak. Trillions of years had passed, and the 9 Gods Peak had transformed from 9 ordinary floating islands into a famous divine artifact in the endless God realm. Legend had it that it had even withstood a blow from the god of space and time without shattering. Qin Guang could only express his speechlessness. Only God knew how the Master God of Chaos smuggled the 9 Immortals Peak to the true martial realm in advance, and then disguised it as a task tool. Also, who was the one behind this? It's fine if I die because of you, but you still want to reveal the answer at the last moment? Are you planning to piss me off first? Are you still going to whip the corpse? Qin Guang could not be bothered to complain anymore. Forget it, if others are trapped here, then so be it. Now that I'm about to die, why should I care so much? This time, I've fallen too hard. Leaving such a thought in his mind, Qin Guang's vision turned black, and all his consciousness completely collapsed. Time passed, and no one knew how much time had passed. In the void of the true martial realm, faint murmurs could be heard. Maybe I'm dead? No, if I'm really dead, then why do I think I'm dead? Then shouldn't I know nothing, or should I be crossing the bridge of helplessness in the underworld? Or else, I should have a soul or something, right? Wait a minute, what happened just now? Forget it, I can't remember, I'll continue to sleep. Time flies. Qin Guang was clearly dead, but he always felt that he was still alive. He did not know how much time had passed, nor did he know what he was doing at this time, and what state he was in. While he was sleeping, another person fell into unprecedented busyness. At this moment, Lu Li had transformed into an ordinary martial artist and was lurking in the true martial realm. She walked and stopped in this world, and no one knew what she was doing. She looked like an ordinary martial artist. Perhaps 10 million years had passed, or perhaps 100 million years had passed. Lu Li's figure flashed in the 9th sacred city, and then she finally disappeared from the true martial realm. In the depths of the Sea of Time, on the Sage Island, Lu Li's figure was also left under the statue of Sage Right Qin. She was dressed in linen clothes and looked travel-worn. However, she did not stay for long. She was like a passerby, and only lingered under the statue's feet for a while, and then disappeared. In the world of fate, in the world of Qilin's arm which was covered with brass fireworks, in the world of Mosaic Race Track, many places that Qin Guang had been to, and some places that he had never been to, were still in the chaos. In the unformed small world, Lu Li's figure was left behind. After walking through all of them, Lu Li disappeared from the heavenly Holy Grail and appeared in the real world. In the past, she could not appear in the real world. However, after the real world and the real world had merged, the real world had also become a part of the heavenly Holy Grail. As long as she was willing to consume her divine power, she could also descend. The outside was still bustling with traffic, and the lights were waning. It was as if nothing had changed. Lu Li stood in the campus of Gokyo University and looked at a group of men and women who were talking and laughing in the distance. They were a group of elite students of Gokyo University. They were still the same people, but they were not the same people. At this moment in this world, perhaps only Lu Li knew what had happened. Lu Li's figure suddenly disappeared after a long sigh. When she appeared again, she was already sitting cross-legged in the center of Cloud City. She slowly closed her eyes, and her body sank down little by little. She slowly and thoroughly integrated into Cloud City. Everything that should be done had been done. Next, it would depend on that guy's luck. Chapter 1290. Chen Guang didn't die. He was just completely shattered. His body and soul had completely fused with the Holy Grail. Of course, in the eyes of those who wanted him dead, he was really dead. He had turned from a complete soul into an artifact spirit. There was no difference between being alive and being dead. To the existences in the God realm who wanted him dead, the next step would be to wait for the 3,000 planes in the heavenly Holy Grail, especially the 9 great unique worlds, to evolve on their own, from nothing to something, from prosperity to decline, and finally to slowly walk towards destruction. The Protoss had a lifespan, so did the planes. However, to ordinary life forms, the lifespan of a plane was so long that it was almost eternal. But to the gods of the endless divine realm, especially the god emperors and main gods at the very top of the pyramid, even the most complete plane, as long as it wasn't the endless divine realm, the birth and destruction of these worlds were nothing more than a passing matter. Now that the heavenly grail had evolved into a complete world and left the endless divine realm, it had become a world of its own. When the world of the Holy Grail was completely destroyed, this artifact would naturally appear in the endless divine realm. When that time came, it would be found, destroyed, and refined. The artifact spirit, Chen Guang, would naturally be dead. As for how the 9 ancient wells that Chen Guang was particularly concerned about were smuggled over, and how the master god of chaos forcefully broke the barrier and sent one of his hands into the heavenly grail, the endless divine realm had to pay a huge price for these things. The god emperors and low-tier Protoss were only projections. Moreover, the Origin will had exploited the loophole in the heavenly grail to force the projection to conform to the rules and obtain the identity of a player. It was easy and didn't need to pay a huge price. However, the master god of chaos had come in person. Even if it was just a hand, it wasn't something that the heavenly grail could withstand. But if the entire plane was directly torn apart, the most likely outcome was that this extremely troublesome cup would disappear again. No one knew how many billions of years it would have to wait for it to appear again. Or perhaps, the next time it would secretly cause trouble, it would be more prepared and become more difficult to deal with. Therefore, even though the origin will of the God realm was completely emotionless, it still took a risk this time. Then, he made use of the blood relationship between the Master God of Chaos and the Emperor of the Azure to trace the coordinates of the true Force realm, which was a small world, across time and space. Then, he sacrificed more than 3 million genius Shenhuang projections from all levels of the endless divine realm. Finally, he managed to send a hand of the Master God of Chaos into the true Force realm without destroying the stability of the realm of the Holy Grail. In the countless years of the God realm's existence, there had never been such a thing where the 8 Master Gods and their essence wills had joined forces. Yet, they were only dealing with a weakling, and they had expended a huge amount of energy to do so. This was not difficult to understand. It was like an ordinary person who had a complicated glass piggy bank in front of them. They wanted to take out all the coins in it, but they were unwilling to destroy the piggy bank. So, the energy they had to expend would be countless times more than if they just smashed the piggy bank. It was normal for them to be sweating profusely from exhaustion. This was just a simplified explanation. In reality, the origin will and the 8 master gods had paid a huge price for this. After the master god of chaos had crushed Qin with one palm, the origin will and the 8 master gods had taken the initiative to enter a deep sleep. They were only waiting for the heavenly grail's internal world to be destroyed and then reappear to find the cup. When that time came, it would not be easy to completely eliminate this tumor of the endless divine realm. Taking the initiative to enter a deep sleep to recover their strength was understandable. The origin will and the master gods were not worried that something out of their control would happen during this period of time. Of course, they did not have such things as emotions in the first place. In their minds, it was natural for them to decide on a matter and then complete it. The laws of the endless divine realm were formed by themselves, and the rules were set by themselves. Therefore, there was no possibility of failure. They only needed to wait for the matter to be completed naturally. It was like a person standing on a tall building and throwing an iron ball to the ground. Then the iron ball would definitely fall to the ground sooner or later. Although the current heavenly grail was an anomaly in the endless divine realm and brought about some uncertainty, it would return to the divine realm sooner or later. When that time came, everything would naturally go back to square one. There would not be any anomaly in the endless divine realm in the future. Everything could continue to evolve step by step. Of course, the lifespan of the master gods was indescribably long. The origin will of the divine realm had existed since ancient times. It was just a nap. When it woke up, everything would be fine. Time flew like an arrow, but it was also as slow as a snail. But no one could stop time from moving forward little by little. Even the master god of space and time, who controlled the laws of space and time, could only achieve eternal stillness in his own domain. But the price to pay was huge. As for the entire endless divine realm, and then specifically to the heavenly grail, and even more specifically to the true martial realm in the heavenly grail and the real world after the fusion, to achieve complete stillness was beyond the ability of the master god of space and time. If it was possible, the master god of space and time would even want to personally speed up the flow of time in the heavenly grail. After all, the sooner the heavenly grail appeared, the sooner this matter would be resolved. In the campus of Wujing University, the sun shone brightly on the vast Yuanming Lake. A gentle breeze blew, and the clear and crystalline waves twinkled like stars. Specks of light were reflected on the glass walls of the library, adding some beauty to the library in the afternoon. The green willow tree swayed slowly with the gentle breeze, looking sleepy. A few summer cicadas were lying on the branches of the willow tree, chirping more cheerfully than anyone else, contrasting with the dispirited and listless students on the long bridge over Yuanming Lake. However, not everyone on the bridge was in a bad state of mind. There were still some people who were chatting happily and were in high spirits. The fourth-year undergraduate students were finally about to graduate. They had already taken their graduation photos in the student robes. As for the students who were about to graduate, they formed teams to go to the school building to get their own graduation certificate, degree certificate, or completion certificate. Right? I heard that Qin is coming too. Do you think it's necessary for him to do this? A graduation certificate is important to us, but it doesn't mean much to a rich man like him, right? Otherwise, even if he sends someone else to collect it on his behalf, the school won't say anything, right? That's not necessarily true. The richer and more powerful a person is, the more they care about their reputation. Chen Guang might be rich now, but that doesn't mean that he's flawless. Right now, everyone's staring at the stains on his private life, and if he wants to wash his name clean, then he can't be criticized elsewhere. Obtaining his graduation certificate is a small matter, but if it falls into the eyes of someone with ulterior motives and posted it on the internet, then it will become a loophole for others to attack. That's true. Maybe some people have already thought of the headlines. Billionaire graduate? The dignity of a prestigious school only exists in name. Who is to blame? It's all his own fault. Where did he get the guts to do this? What era is this? He still wants to learn from the ancient times and have multiple wives and concubines? It's not just multiple wives and concubines. He's blatantly having 1, 2, 3, 17, 8, and 9 concubines. Not that many, but who asked him to have such a big heart? Who asked him to have two national goddesses that everyone is jealous of? That's right. I really don't know what's wrong with people nowadays. They have no sense of shame at all. Shh, you keep your voice down. If someone else hears you, they'll definitely take revenge and make things difficult for you. In fact, there's nothing strange about these rich people's affairs. It's just that Xinguang is too young and the women are too conspicuous. These things seem difficult for people to accept. That's right. Take the He family in Macau for example. Don't other people get along well with several wives? They laughed dryly and stopped discussing Xinguang's private life. The reason was very simple. On the other side of the long bridge, Xinguang was talking and laughing with his classmates all the way to this side. It was okay to gossip behind someone's back, but to discuss someone's private life in front of them was to offend them. Moreover, it was not a secret that Xinguang had good ears. It was said that there was once a person who spoke ill of the little girl beside him, Sun Xiaoxuan, across a large square. He immediately chased after the person and slapped his face a couple of times. Even then, he couldn't say anything to vent his anger. The reason was very simple. Xinguang was the first to stand on the side of reason, and others couldn't afford to offend him. In the past few months, many things had happened on the campus of Gokyo University, in the vast Huaxia, and even in the world. Xinguang seemed to have suddenly changed. He was no longer wandering outside for more than half of the year like he did last semester. He had been staying in school since the beginning of the semester. He also didn't cause trouble at school. Instead, he went to and left school like an ordinary student. Of course, it was impossible for him to be completely like an ordinary person. From time to time, people from outside the school would drive into the school to look for him. For example, several executives of the Xinguang group would come to visit him. He didn't have any scruples. His office was where he was, and others could often see a strange scene in the school. A group of people in suits and leather shoes would either sit on chairs by Yuanming Lake, stand in a corner of the square, or sit in a bar in the school's commercial street. They were talking about the Xinguang group's assets, which were worth hundreds of millions, or even tens of billions. Until now, many of the IPs that Xinguang had laid out for a long time had been incubated. The global box office of Women had returned, World School of Performing Arts had been a global hit, and the variety show, High God, had been a hit since the 4th episode, sweeping the ratings and exporting it overseas. After the transformation of Tongshan Industrial Plant, Chengwang Environmental Protection had almost swept the national environmental protection industry with its disruptive heavy equipment. It had also reached agreements with many top laboratories around the world. Chengwang Environmental Protection provided technical support, and a number of scientific research institutions provided personnel, equipment, and other aspects of support. Several large photocatalyst research institutes were established, among which Chengwang Environmental Protection was in a leading position. In less than half a year, Tianguang Group and Chengwang Environmental Protection had transformed from two small, unknown groups into behemoths with a valuation of more than $10 billion. They could even leverage the global market of $100 billion. For the past 6 months, however, the true master of this colossus had been like any other student. He'd stayed on campus, not going anywhere. There had been rumors that a boss like him didn't need to do everything himself. There would naturally be professionals to take care of the business for him. He just needed to make more money. He didn't have such lofty ideals in life like other rich people. He seemed to enjoy the treatment of a boss who didn't have to do anything himself. Of course, it seemed that there was really no need for him to struggle. With the growing influence of the new photocatalyst around the world, many people originally thought that Tianguang Group was his foundation. However, in just a few months, Chengwang Environmental Protection, which had derived all kinds of added value around the new photocatalyst, suddenly emerged. The world suddenly realized that even if this guy didn't do anything from now on with the patents in his hands, he could at least monopolize the market of $100 billion in the next 20 years. Not to mention the inevitable competition in the high-tech industry, this didn't exist at all because he had a complete technological monopoly. No one could crack it. Men were so young and rich. It was inevitable that there would be some scandals. Chen Guang's reputation in this area had never been good. He had never been a model of cleanliness. However, no one could stand the big thing he did last month. It wasn't that he had brazenly brought them to the front of the stage, but for some reason, 2 months ago, a large group of girls with different temperaments, but all of them were beautiful enough to captivate even the birds and beasts, suddenly appeared on campus at the same time. Although Chen Guang used to meet different girls on campus from time to time, it had never happened before that all of them appeared at the same time. At that time, many people in the school saw the scene in the campus square. They thought it was a man's purgatory, the most terrible shuraba in the legends. However, none of these women made a fuss. Instead, they chatted happily. Chen Guang himself seemed very calm. No matter how fierce the storm was, he would not move. At that time, among these women, there were Jiang Yage and Jin Shiyue, the two national goddesses who were popular all over the country, Sun Xiaoxuan, the campus belle, Wu Tong, who was dressed in a police uniform, and Tang Ying, who had an elite temperament. Zhuo Jingxi, the helmsman of Chengwang Environmental Protection, was also young and beautiful. It was rumored that she used to be Chen Guang's counselor. Many people in the school knew her. Although Lu Fei, the proud daughter of the Dechuan Lu group, was not famous in the eyes of ordinary people, there were still a few people in the large Gokyo University who knew her. No one expected her to be involved with Chen Guang. However, the ones who attracted the most attention were the other three. One of them was the famous campus belle, Miss Wenwen, and the other two Lolitas, Xen Qin and Wu Miaowan, who rarely appeared in public. These women appeared in the school at the same time. Coupled with the fact that they had appeared on the internet many times before, and Chen Guang had never denied the rumors, people could not help but wonder how big this guy's heart was. How shameless was he to be able to face the shuraba in broad daylight without batting an eyelid? In this world, there were many people who were richer than him. There were also many people who had more women than him. However, there was no one who was as rich as him, had such high standards of women around him, and could risk the world's condemnation to get together in broad daylight. Even though the crowd did not gather for more than half an hour, and everyone quickly went their separate ways after that, the impact of the incident remained. Even today, 2 months later, it had not subsided. However, no matter what, after today, Chen Guang would officially graduate and leave Gokyo University. In the future, even if the students in the school wanted to mock him in secret or gossip about him, they would have to forcibly add the identity of an alumnus in their hearts. No one knew what Chen Guang's intention was at that time. Was he going to announce it to the world? However, there was no need for him to do so. After the incident, many people even indirectly asked around and found out that among the women who appeared at that time, not all of them had a substantial relationship with him. In fact, even Chen Guang himself did not know why this happened. Among the crowd, especially Jin Shiyue, Jiang Yage, Wu Tong, and Lu Fei, who had to face great pressure when they went home, they did not know why this happened either. Everything seemed very strange, very twisted, and very strange. At this moment, Chen Guang himself was still in the heavenly Holy Grail, unaware of the passage of time. The body he left in the outside world did not have a messy private life like others thought. Instead, it was as pure as a saint, and it had been a long time since he ate meat. Some people vaguely felt that the world was starting to become a little incomprehensible. The people they were familiar with seemed a little strange, but they could not find any loopholes. Chapter 1291. The whole world had come to a standstill. Some astute people would sigh like this in their hearts from time to time, but when these people turned their heads to look around them, the roads were still busy, and all kinds of gossip on the internet were still going on. The English Premier League was about to come to an end, and the NBA Finals were won by the Warriors. This year's college graduates still received their respective graduation certificates one after another. Some people chose to apply for a bachelor's degree and devote themselves to society. Many people even signed contracts of intent with foreign companies in the first semester of their senior year and only waited for graduation to go there. For example, the horny students in the Department of Finance of Gokyo University majored in international trade. This matter was also a good talk in the school. Many majors that scored higher than finance and international trade in the college entrance examination were not so popular. Many people regretted and were jealous. If they knew that the top 5 finance majors were so greedy, they would not have applied for environmental science. Of course, many people chose to take the postgraduate entrance examination. Among them, the environmental science was the representative. There were more than 30 people in Qin Guang's class, and more than 5 were confirmed to be postgraduate students. More than half of the students were ready to go all out for the postgraduate entrance examination. Based on everyone's usual grades, the probability of being admitted was not low. In Chen Guang's dormitory, unexpectedly, 2 of the 4 brothers were preparing to take the postgraduate entrance examination. One was Bai Nyangzi, Bai Fan. Although this guy had been messing around during his 4 years in college and wrote some terrible online novels from time to time, this guy's grades had always been quite good. Before, he had said that he wanted Qin Guang to protect him, but that was just a casual remark and he did not take it seriously. The only online novel he wrote was the unlucky and deceptive female novel that was accidentally bought by Lu Xiaoyang. Later, Qin Guang did not advertise for him, and each novel was a failure. Now, Bai Nyangzi had completely given up on this idea. The other was Xiong'e. Although Xiong'e looked big and stupid, how many of the people who were admitted to the top 5 were really stupid? His grades in the class were above average, and if he worked hard for a while, he still had hope of taking the postgraduate entrance examination. As for Lin Jingwei, he even directly guaranteed the graduate students at Peking University. Although Lin Jingwei did not stand out in class, his grades were always the best, and he could be regarded as a straight-A student in his class. This meant that he would have to return to Yanjing after graduation, and he had an appointment with Gao Ya. Gao Ya wasn't guaranteed a postgraduate degree, but she seemed to be planning to take it herself. In fact, with Lin Jingwei's family background, Gao Ya could directly get into the Yen Capital University. However, she was proud and didn't want Lin Jingwei's family to stand up for her. She was confident that she could get into the university on her own. These 2 people of different backgrounds might really continue to walk together in the future. Sun Xiaoshuan's choice was very strange. She could have been guaranteed a postgraduate position at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, but she gave up at the last moment and gave her spot to another girl in her class whose grades were almost the same as hers. As for herself, she didn't say that she wanted to go abroad, nor did she say that she wanted to stay in school to take the postgraduate entrance examination. However, she wasn't in a hurry to find a job, and when others asked her, she didn't say that she wanted to go back to her hometown to work. Gradually, everyone stopped asking about it. She was planning to stay in the 5 capitals, or wherever Qin Guang wanted to go, she would follow along. There wasn't much gossip in the class, but they felt that it wasn't worth it for her to do so. Not to mention the fact that Qin Guang was surrounded by beautiful girls. Everyone in the class knew that although they had feelings for each other, there was nothing between them after 4 years in university. Qin Guang had vaguely given her a status, but he had never taken the most important step in their relationship. Gao Ya's best friend couldn't figure it out and even gave her ideas from time to time. Since she had already made up her mind and didn't care about anything else, why did she have to be so reserved? She could find a chance to drug this guy or get him drunk. She could even force herself on him. However, Sun Xiaoshuan always smiled foolishly and refused. She looked as if she, the emperor, wasn't in a hurry, so why should she, the eunuch, be in a hurry? Gao Ya didn't know what to do, but she didn't insist. In short, no matter what thoughts they had, they couldn't beat the passing of time. After they got their diplomas, the only group activity left for the environmental engineering class was the last meal. From then on, everyone would go their separate ways, walk their own lives, and experience what they had to go through. Maybe one day in the future, everyone would want to have a reunion. They wouldn't all come, but they would at least get together in 2s and 3s to reminisce about their university years. At the corner of the Golden Campus Square, the owner of a barbecue shop was sitting quietly at his stall. His hands were moving up and down, and more than 100 skewers of barbecued meat were floating over the flame of the oven under the control of his dexterous and strong fingers. As they floated over, the fragrant and delicious grease was grilled out of the skewers and fell into the bonfire, igniting a bunch of flames and making a sizzling sound. The owner raised his head from time to look at the students who were sitting together, talking and laughing, hugging each other and crying, or gulping down wine. He felt quite melancholy. Although it didn't matter who he was doing business with, these students were his old customers. Even if they left, new students would become his old customers next semester. After all, everyone was familiar with each other, so the owner was still a little reluctant to let them go. However, he soon shook his head. Why was he lamenting here? It was because Qin Guang was one of the students in this class, and he had a deep impression of him. Actually, there weren't many students who knew his surname. Gaoya opened her mouth and tore off a crisp bone from a bamboo skewer. She chewed on it and said in a muffled voice, "Xiaoxuan, I don't know what's going on, but I feel weird." Sun Xiaoxuan took a sip of juice and looked back at Gaoya. He then stole a glance at Qin Guang, who was drinking with Lin Jingwei and the others. He said, "Actually, I think so too." Gaoya stomped her feet impatiently. "What's going on? Everything is fine, but I feel like something is missing. I really don't understand." "Maybe you'll get it after a while." Sun Xiaoxuan's gaze landed on Qin Guang. Like the other girls around Qin Guang, Sun Xiaoxuan also felt that everyone was a little different since a few months ago. However, this feeling was very faint and mysterious. There was no evidence at all, and there was no scientific reason for it. It was fine if the others changed. After all, they were all ordinary people. Their minds weren't very firm and mature. Maybe it had something to do with a nightmare. Wait, maybe it wasn't a nightmare? Speaking of which, I don't even know if my identity as a player is real or fake. I remember all those things, but it's only been a few months, and my brain can barely remember them. My memory wasn't so bad before. Also, it's been a few months, and there are no new missions. Why is that? Gaoya began to mutter in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Sun Xiaoxuan didn't say anything. She just stared blankly at Qin Guang. Her eyes flashed, but in her mind she was thinking that everyone was like this. They were all players. Compared to ordinary people, Qin Guang was the one who was most likely to know the most secrets. However, when she asked him, he was also confused and had a headache. Sometimes, it would even make him go crazy. After a long time, everyone avoided these topics in front of him. He was supposed to be a player, but he chose to forget about it. No one mentioned it to him. Regardless of whether it was Sun Xiaoxuan, Zhuo Jingxi, Lin Jingwei, or the executives in his company who were also players, or even his old subordinates in the summer of Wuxia, they had no choice but to come to a tacit agreement when faced with someone like him, who was undoubtedly the strongest player in the world. They couldn't bring themselves to say anything. The only S-rank player in the human world had probably gone berserk. No one was allowed to talk about player matters with him, much less the mission space. Otherwise, he would go crazy and suffer from seizures. But they couldn't go on like this, could they? Sun Xiaoxuan shook her head helplessly. But what else could they do? Yes, there was nothing they could do. For players like Sun Xiaoxuan, the strongest was only a C level. Other than waiting for Qin Guang to recover, there was nothing they could do. After all, even Wenwen, who stood at the peak of A level and might have reached S level, couldn't do anything. It was said that she tried to use the dual cultivation technique to forcibly awaken Qin Guang's memory, but she failed. This guy rejected her. That's right, he rejected her very firmly. When Wenwen showed the slightest sign of it, he turned around and ran. Even when Wen, who had done it with him more than once in the past, had been sternly rejected by him. Needless to say, Sun Xiaoxuan, Tang Ying, Jin Shiyue, and Wu Tong, who were close to him but had never done it with him. Speaking of which, he didn't know how Tang Ying's research was going. Many people didn't know that in addition to Morning Light environmental protection, Qin Guang had actually invested in another laboratory, which was the bioengineering laboratory led by Tang Ying. After becoming a player, Tang Ying, who was originally only a second-tier scholar in the world, suddenly had an epiphany, and the results came like a whirlwind. According to her, her IQ had also increased. In the past, she was about 167. Although she could ride on the heads of ordinary people and beat them up, there was still a gap between her and many legendary geniuses in human history, such as Planck, Tesla, Einstein, and Zhu Chongji. But after awakening as a player, she claimed that her IQ was as high as 245. As for why it wasn't 250, she told people not to ask her why. In short, she lived frugally and guarded the samples she had taken from Qin Guang. The progress of her genetic analysis was improving almost every day. At first, in order to prevent the leak of Qin Guang's important resources, Tang Ying chose to work alone. But since Qin Guang began to act strangely, everyone became anxious, and Tang Ying's genetic analysis became a life-saving straw. After some discussion, they agreed that Tang Ying would distribute the samples to the top laboratories around the world through the method of gene cultivation and proliferation. Of course, she still had a trick up her sleeve. She only gave each laboratory a fragment. This precise gene fragment cutting method was something she had come up with herself in the past few months. According to her, she could probably win a Nobel Prize in biology in a few years. In the end, Tang Ying's task changed from a single person's hard work to a compilation of all the research results. This was extremely difficult for a researcher, but Tang Ying, who claimed to have an IQ of 245, was able to turn misfortunes into blessings. Of course, the help of other laboratories wasn't free, but the companies under Qin Guang were super rich. In addition, the Ministry of Heaven also allocated funds regardless of cost. Jiang Yage and Jin Shiriyue also contributed financially to the country. Although Qin Guang didn't want to be involved, everyone had their eyes on him, the only S-rank player at the moment. Even if the strength of many players had increased naturally and inexplicably over the past few months, the only thing that was undoubtedly the strongest class was still very important. Come to think of it, it was strange. The game space didn't descend again, and no one did anything, but why did the players' levels increase inexplicably? No one would ever think that even though Qin Guang was already dead, he was still alive in a certain sense. Perhaps he was in between the living and the dead. In the past, every time he entered the world in the cup, it was only for a very short period of time in the real world, and no one else knew about it. But it was different this time. If converted to the outside time, it had been from the beginning of the second semester of the 4th year until he received his graduation certificate and degree certificate. What he entered into the world in the cup was almost all of his soul. What was left outside, in scientific terms, was only equivalent to the little bit of intuition in his spine, which could generally control blood flow, knee-jerk reflex, and so on. But it took too long this time. If he really died completely, then the Qin Guang in the outside world would probably be completely replaced by a soul fabricated by the heavenly Holy Grail. Perhaps this soul could inherit all of his memories, all of his personality, and help him complete the rest of his life. But a fabricated soul would always be a fabricated soul, and not the real him. But the current situation was that although he was dead, he had completely merged with the heavenly Holy Grail, and this real world was a part of the heavenly Holy Grail. The current Qin Guang existed in the cloud city of the heavenly Holy Grail, in the realm of true force, and also in the real universe. He had completely divided into countless particles, and was everywhere in all the worlds of the heavenly Holy Grail. Even in the real universe, he was on Earth, and in distant galaxies such as Andromeda and Orion, he was also present. He had turned into particles, so small that it was negligible, even smaller than the so-called quark particles, but he really existed everywhere. In the real universe, the world was still operating, although the direction of the operation was a little strange. So he, who stayed outside, had to live like a normal person. His soul, which had originally sunk into the heavenly Holy Grail, was slowly crossing the barrier of time and space and returning to his body in the real world. As for the realm of true force, 1 billion years had passed. Just as Qin Guang was worried, the millions of human players in the 9th Holy City, including Chu Zijin, Zhuo Jingxi, and Lu Fei, were still unaware. Qin Guang had disappeared for 1 billion years, but everyone seemed to be in no hurry. It was as if he had just found a deserted place to slack off and take a nap. Chapter 1292. In the past billion years, everyone had found a position for themselves in the true martial domain, and then unswervingly walked towards this position. If Qin Guang were to sum up the current human players, they might be considered as humans, but in a sense, they were not humans. The whole world was like a machine that would never wear out, and everyone in this world, a flower, a grass, a tree, and an insect were all parts of this world. The natives in the true martial domain were generally the kind of parts that could be worn out, but could self-restore. As for the outsiders, the immortal belonged to the real high-level parts that would never be damaged or aged. Moreover, because of Qin Guang's disappearance, no one stood up to tell them that the situation was not right. Perhaps even if Qin Guang spoke to someone else, the other party might be able to understand his words, but they wouldn't be bothered by it in their minds. It was not only the immortal who had become slow, even the natives in the heavenly Holy Grail, and even Master Xianxia and Wu Qingming, who were constantly dying and being reborn, did not feel anything wrong. But in fact, if a normal person could still remember time, they would be scared to the point of wetting their pants when they thought that someone had not aged for 1,000,000,000 years. Among these countless parts, there was one that was slightly different. It was not that she had realized something, but she had been doing the same boring thing over and over again in the past 1,000,000,000 years, just like everyone else. This was Tang Ying. As early as after Qin Guang left, Tang Ying spent about 10 years to finally complete the first analysis of Qin Guang's genes in this world. The Lord Holy Emperor had disappeared, and they couldn't get a new sample. However, Tang Ying in the true martial world had also patted his forehead and had a sudden inspiration. He had thought of a way to combine martial arts with science. Coincidentally, a female captain of the Holy City's Godiai 13 practiced a martial technique that was compatible with longevity and was best at stimulating biological activity. When Qin Guang had created this martial technique, he had borrowed the idea of Emperor Qing's lost technique from a novel he had read in the past. It was called In Search of Supernatural Records. Although it wasn't as marvelous as the Xuanhuan novel in the true martial world, its destructive power wasn't bad. Qin Guang first passed it to a younger brother, and it was passed down from generation to generation. When Tang Ying came up with this idea, a woman happened to inherit it. With the cooperation of the two, the sample was successfully multiplied, and the research continued. After a few decades, Tang Ying finally finished decoding Qin Guang's genes for the first time. In fact, it shouldn't have taken so long. However, although the overall technological level of the Zhen Wujie and the real world was almost the same, the production of high-precision instruments was still slower. In the past 50 years, Tang Ying had been waiting for at least 30 years for the equipment to hatch. When Qin Guang left, the frame she built was barely usable, but it was not precise enough. Logically speaking, after completing the first complete deciphering, Tang Ying should have nothing to do. However, she did not feel that anything was wrong and started to decipher from the beginning again. Then, she compared the results of the 2 times, and it took her another 20 years to find something different. It was reasonable to say that DNA represented the most stable structure in human genetics. If there was a genetic mutation, it was either cancer or deformity. Then, she used the same person's sample for both times. Even if it was multiplied and cultivated, it should be exactly the same. In addition, she used the same person's sample for both times. Even if it was multiplied and cultivated, it should be exactly the same. Then why were the results of the 2 attempts different? Tang Ying was puzzled, so she didn't think too much about it. Then she started the 3rd time, and it took her another 20 years. Then, she combined the results of the 3 times and compared them together. This time, it took her 30 years, but she found something different. 1,000,000,000 years passed in the blink of an eye. Tang Ying couldn't remember how many millions of times she had repeated the same thing. What made her feel desperate was that even though she had repeated it so many times, she still faced the same situation 1,000,000,000 years ago. The results were not exactly the same. Thanks to the further improvement of the semiconductor industry, the true martial realm had a vast territory. Although there hadn't been any revolutionary scientific and technological progress, the computing power of the supercomputing system in the true martial realm had already surpassed the Earth by many times. Who told the world to be so big, to be able to stack materials regardless of the cost? So, in the later stages, Tang Ying, who had the ability to use the supercomputer at any time, no longer needed to compare the gene sequences. She only needed to input the data into the supercomputer center and then wait for the results. It was much faster than doing it herself. Of course, it also took a long time. A single gene sequence was a huge amount of data, not to mention that Tang Ying had slowly accumulated to tens of millions of times. Tang Ying, who was wearing a white coat, was sitting on an ergonomic chair. She looked at the progress bar in front of her, which had reached 98%. In fact, she had been waiting here for more than 10 days. Although there was only 0.2% left, she was afraid that it would take at least half a day to finish. Ring, ring, ring. Tang Ying's phone beside her rang with a text message. She stretched and picked up the phone. The text message was, "Notice, all directors of the Martyr's Palace, please head to the mysterious Heaven Palace to attend the regular board meeting within an hour." Tang Ying shrugged and looked at the progress bar unhappily. It was still at 98%. Forget it, I don't think it will be finished in a short time. It will be the same if I come back after the meeting. I really don't want to be a director anymore, sigh. Unlike the others who were immersed in their different identities, Tang Ying had only been guarding her research center for the past few years. For example, Wu Tong had given herself the title of Zhen Wujie's Public Security Department. Now, her authority was no longer limited to the 9th floor. She was in charge of the public security departments of the entire Zhen Wujie. The others were more or less the same. Jin Shirui and Jiang Yage had held concerts in the 9 holy cities and other 2nd and 3rd tier cities. The reason why Tang Ying was still a director was because she needed unlimited authority to use the supercomputer center, as well as to allocate resources to operate and develop her own biological research center. The power structure of the Martyr's Palace had evolved over the years. It had changed a lot since Chen Guang left. Currently, Wu Tong, Tang Ying, Sun Xiaoxuan, Zhuo Jingxi, and Lin Jingwei, who were closest to Chen Guang, were all directors. In addition, there were the inheritors of the 3 emperors in the 9th holy city, as well as 2 or 3 new top martial emperors who had risen in recent years. Abbess Xan Yuan and Wu Qingming, the 2 masters, were not there. Although they had already recognized their disciples, the 2 of them had already assimilated with this world. They didn't have the physique of immortality. They died 1,000,000 years after Chen Guang left. But after a few years, the 2 of them cultivated martial arts again and returned to the 9th holy city. The 2 of them were somewhat different from the real natives of the true martial domain. Ever since their memories were awakened by Chen Guang, they wouldn't lose their memories even if they were reborn. The Martyr's Palace's directors' meeting was held once every 10 years. But this time, the 2 masters were not there. They had been reborn 2 years ago. Only God knew which corner they were cultivating martial arts again. There wasn't anything extraordinary in the regular meeting. They talked about the recent major events that had taken place in the true martial world. They talked about whether there was anything worth paying attention to. They also talked about where Chen Guang might have gone and so on. In fact, he had been missing for 1,000,000,000 years. But at the meeting, these people talked as if they had just seen him half an hour ago. This so-called meeting was nothing more than a concrete embodiment of the power structure of the true martial domain. To put it bluntly, it was just a gathering of people from time to time. But Tang Ying was quite absent-minded from beginning to end. She had a strong desire to go back and see the results of the calculation. Why are you in a daze? Let's go out later? Wu Tong, who was sitting next to Tang Ying, elbowed her waist. Tang Ying shook her head. No, I'm busy. Wu Tong covered her mouth and laughed. Why are you always guarding that broken place of yours? You're going to get old if you keep staying at home. Tang Ying rolled her eyes. I can't be bothered to joke with you. I reckon we'll see the results this time. Wu Tong continued to tease her. Come on, I don't know how many times I've heard you say that. Hey, how many times? Wu Tong seemed to have a momentary doubt as she spoke. She seemed to be asking Tang Ying, but also seemed to be asking herself. In fact, the 2 of them didn't know that they had already had a similar conversation more than 1,000,000 times. Not only did they say the same words, but even their tone and expressions were completely the same. But this time, the conversation between the 2 was a little different. Wu Tong asked a question at the end. Tang Ying frowned slightly. She wasn't angry at Wu Tong. Instead, the restless feeling in her heart was getting stronger and stronger. She couldn't care less about Bai Hua, who was excitedly introducing the new discovery of the energy company. She got up and walked out. "Hey, Lady Ying, where are you going?" Wu Tong asked as she got up. Tang Ying walked quickly. "I won't be coming to dinner tonight. I'm going back to the lab to take a look." After saying that, she jogged all the way. Her steps were swift. Wu Tong thought for a moment and followed her. Before she left, she turned around and said to everyone, "Nothing big has happened in the police department recently. I'm going to take a look at the situation." After saying that, Wu Tong also ran away. Although the others were a little surprised, they didn't care too much. In the real world, although everyone was familiar with Qin Guang, they didn't meet each other often. They had been in the Zhen Wu Jie for 1,000,000,000 years, but there was no substantial progress in their friendship. Basically, everyone was still minding their own business. Wu Tong followed Tang Ying's pace and rushed back to the lab. When she pushed the door open, she saw Tang Ying staring at the monitor in a daze. Wu Tong approached her and asked, "What the hell is going on?" Tang Ying didn't answer for a long time. After a long time, she muttered to herself with a blank face, "How could this be? It's impossible. What the hell is going on?" Seeing her blank eyes, Wu Tong panicked. Tang Ying slammed the table and said, "I get it. This guy's genes are different from ordinary people. Even the dimensions are different." Wu Tong didn't understand what she was saying at all. She simply grabbed Tang Ying's shoulder and shook it. "Are you stupid because of your research?" Tang Ying broke away from Wu Tong's hands and threw herself in front of the monitor again. Her eyes widened as she looked at the new DNA combination diagram that was moving like the Milky Way. There were countless small dots constantly moving on it, and each dot represented the most basic DNA unit. The DNA structure of ordinary people was, of course, stable, but the three-dimensional diagram in front of Tang Ying never stabilized for a second. In fact, she didn't know how the supercomputer center did the calculations. All the previous results could be shown in a flat way, but this time, after the comparison, a picture like this appeared. After a long time, Tang Ying finally calmed down and said with a strange look on her face, "I knew it. This guy is different from us." "What do you mean?" Wu Tong felt that Tang Ying was becoming more and more paranoid. She wondered if she should find a master who practiced spiritual-type skills to help her. "You've heard the story of the worm, right?" Tang Ying turned around and asked. "Wu Tong, ? If you put a piece of paper in front of you, the surface area of this paper is infinite, and then put a worm on it, no matter how the worm crawls, even if it crawls for a lifetime, its trajectory will be limited to this piece of paper. But humans can directly grab it and throw it into the air." Wu Tong understood a little. "Aren't you talking about the difference between two-dimensional life and three-dimensional life?" Tang Ying nodded. "Yes, in our understanding we live in a three-dimensional world, and human beings are also three-dimensional life forms. To be more specific, each of our genes are basically determined from birth. Even changes in individual cells can't affect our overall state. Our height, appearance, and body shape are generally limited to a certain range after birth. What about Qin Guang? You've been doing analysis for so many years. What have you found?" Tang Ying sighed. "His DNA is different from ours. This guy's genes are changing. Furthermore, it is eternally changing with time." Wu Tong asked, "So what does this mean?" Tang Ying looked back at the monitor in front of her. "This means that I'll never be able to get the real answer. Even though it seemed that I had completed it tens of millions of times and finally created such a three-dimensional image, I felt that I could continue to repeat it tens of millions of times on the basis of this image. At that time, I would probably be able to create a second three-dimensional image, but the two three-dimensional images would still be able to be combined together. Perhaps, even if I make tens of millions of such three-dimensional pictures and continue to combine them, I still won't get anything. This guy's genetic sequence is simply tens of millions to the infinite power." Wu Tong was a little confused, but that didn't stop her from feeling Tang Ying's despair. While the two were talking, the nebula picture on the monitor began to change, becoming smaller and smaller. "Huh. Tang Ying exclaimed in surprise. She saw the nebula picture that originally covered the entire monitor shrink to the size of a pixel. Then, it floated out of the monitor and flew into the air. Wu Tong muttered to herself, "What's going on?" Tang Ying was also stunned. "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" The two inside didn't know that time had once again stopped in the real world outside. In the Biology Research Institute of the Five Capital, Tang Ying was jumping in the air in ecstasy. Her hair was fluttering, her legs were bent, and her whole body was half a meter above the ground. On the monitor in front of her was a three-dimensional picture that was exactly the same as what Tang Ying had seen in the true martial domain. One had used 1 billion years and repeated it tens of millions of times, while the other had only used half a year, but the final result was the same. Of course, this three-dimensional picture was also shrinking, leaving the monitor and floating into the air. In the deepest part of the heavenly Holy Grail, in a certain spatial gap in the infinite darkness and far away, two particles the size of pixels floated over from the void. They slowly stuck to each other, and then completely fused into an extremely tiny bright spot. Then, this bright spot began to move, turning into a line. This line spread out, then kept changing direction, hovering, and finally became a human shape. Chen Guang suddenly opened his eyes. "I'm back again." Chapter 1293. He tried to raise his hand and touch his face, but he failed. He couldn't find his hand at all. No, he didn't have a hand. He didn't have any other limbs, waist, abdomen, chest, buttocks, or even a head or a neck. Right now, he had a humanoid shape, but in essence, it was still the trajectory drawn in the void by the fusion of the two pixels. It was similar to the principle of the electron cloud. Of course, the electron cloud didn't really exist. It was just an electron moving at a high speed within a certain range. Then, it was constantly captured by the microscope, and the trajectories were gathered on a picture. What was presented was the electron cloud. At this time, Chen Guang was more advanced than the electron cloud. At least, it was a trajectory drawn by a whole line of continuous motion. Of course, maybe it was because the speed of the previous dot was too fast, or maybe it was because the speed of light dissipating in this special space was too slow. So, it looked like a whole body at this time, but in fact, it was just pure energy. Chen Guang didn't have anything to be angry about. At least, he now had consciousness again, and could think in his mind. This was much better than being in a daze before. As for the previous period of time, Chen Guang still had some vague memories. It was difficult for him to describe that feeling. After thinking about it, he could only say that it was like a person who couldn't drink well suddenly drinking half a caddy of ergotu. "How long have I been in a coma?" Since he couldn't move, Chen Guang simply let his mind wander. Now, he felt very strange again. It seemed that he had been in a coma for half a year, but it also seemed like it was only for a moment. Suddenly, there was a vast and distant feeling in his heart. He felt as if hundreds of millions of years had passed, enough for the life on Earth to evolve from a single cell to a human. This strong feeling of dislocation didn't make Chen Guang feel uncomfortable. He was very indifferent now, as if nothing mattered. Outside, since he woke up, the time in the real world and the true martial domain had been completely frozen, even if the flow of time in the true martial domain had been accelerated by billions of times. Chen Guang did not know what he was waiting for, nor did he know why he was in this state in the void. He also did not know what was waiting for him next. When a person completely lost the concept of time, no matter how boring the wait was, it would not shake his state of mind. "Nicole, you have two choices now. First, reject my request, then watch as Chen Guang and I meet our end. If you're lucky, you'll be able to escape when the Holy Grail is destroyed. At that time, you'll become a member of the God realm and obtain a seemingly eternal life. Second, voluntarily offer your mechanical heart, accept the fate of death, and pray for our success. At that time, even if you die, he will have the ability to create nothingness with a single thought after transcending the myriad worlds. Even if you're really dead, he can resurrect you and give you a true life." On the other side of the void, there was a small round ball floating, and a faint silhouette of a person appeared in the small ball. This small ball was the photocatalyst research world that Qin Guang had accidentally created. Of course, after a long period of investment in faith, this small laboratory in the cup had already expanded far beyond the scope of a laboratory, becoming a large-scale research center. Nicole's scope of research had also long since broken away from the limits of photocatalysis and expanded infinitely according to her own interests. As a science geek with a clear brain, Nicole mainly researched machinery and electronics in the real world. She was also proficient in various basic subjects such as physics, chemistry, mathematics, and so on. She also had incredible talent, and even though she was working alone, she was still able to research an unimaginable epic-making thing like the electromagnetic cannon. Although it wasn't stable and even blew herself up, if it wasn't for that accident back then, Nicosia would have spent a few more years perfecting it. Perhaps she would have been able to create a true finished product of this revolutionary weapon of mass destruction. Although she was dead now, she had entered this cup in the cup and obtained an almost eternal life. Now that several months had passed in the real world, and 1 billion years had passed in the realm of true force, the small world that Nicole stayed in had simply advanced by 10 billion years, which was even longer than the lifespan of Earth. With such a long time and tireless, even an ordinary person should have become a super genius, not to mention a natural genius like Nicole. She would never be unable to find a direction of research. Not to mention Earth's technology, just the picture of God that suddenly unfolded in front of her after her soul was sucked into the heavenly Holy Grail was enough to exhaust her eternal wisdom, but she still could only see the tip of the iceberg. Of course, even the tip of the iceberg was enough for Nicole's understanding of the rules of the God realm to reach the level of a God Emperor. If she could have the opportunity to leave the heavenly Holy Grail and descend into the God realm, with her current understanding of the rules, she could become a new God Emperor in a very short time. But now, Azure had presented her with two choices. Did you know that I would definitely agree? Sitting in the laboratory, Nicole raised her head and looked at the shadow in front of her. She did not have any excessive reaction and asked very calmly. Azure's voice came from the shadow. Yes, the more you understand God, the more you will understand what we want. Nicole was silent. She still remembered the excitement and curiosity when she first came into contact with God after she was killed in the explosion. Now, she did not know how many years had passed, but she had slowly changed from the initial curiosity to the current understanding. When the veil of God was lifted layer by layer, Nicole's reverence towards God gradually dissipated. It turned out that the so-called God was nothing more than this. They had a longer lifespan, greater strength, and some supernatural special abilities. These abilities were strange, strong, and weak, but they all came from the God race's understanding of the so-called rules. After Nicole spent 10 billion years peeling off the silk cocoons and penetrating the seemingly mysterious rules of the God realm bit by bit, her perception of the so-called God stopped at nothing more than another relatively high-level life in another dimension. The essence of the God realm's rules was no different from the two iron balls on Earth falling at the same time. What was it that he really wanted? What was the true life that this God Emperor named Lu Li was talking about? But I really want to know what a God Emperor with mechanical power would be like. Although I can roughly imagine it in my mind, I haven't seen it with my own eyes. Nicole said with slight unwillingness. The shadow said disdainfully, "What's there to see? It's nothing more than some summoned creatures, or else it's a mechanical body. This Emperor has seen a movie on Earth called Transformers. You can probably think of yourself as the original core of Cybertron. Is that so? A God Emperor with mechanical life appeared in the God realm before? No, but I've heard that God Emperor Qianji is obsessed with the love puppet technique. A plane he created once gave birth to a mechanical life with strength close to that of a God Emperor. As for you, you're probably just a little higher level. But how do I know that you won't lie to me? What if you fail? Or even if you succeed, you can't return the mechanical heart, and I won't be able to resurrect." Nicole was already wavering. Azure did not mind. If you think that this Emperor and Xinguang will lie to you and go back on their word, you can refuse. Ever since we started on this path, every step we took was extremely dangerous, and we could fail at every step. If you can't sincerely take the initiative to strip the mechanical heart, even if there is only a trace of doubt, we will definitely fail. After we die, this holy grail will naturally perish. At that time, you can just go and be a god emperor. If your luck is good enough and your life is tough enough, you might even be able to become a main god. Nicole waved her hand in pain. But that's meaningless. No matter how long my life is, I will eventually be assimilated by the entire god realm. That is equivalent to a complete death. She remembered that she had once been promised eternal life, but now she had long since given up on the idea of eternal life. No matter how long she lived in the endless god realm, in the end, she could only end up with her consciousness and divine sense completely disappearing and dying. Only the countless rules and origin energy that she cultivated during her long life would be turned into stars and absorbed by the entire god realm. Such eternal life was even worse than death. As if she had already sensed Nicole's thoughts, Azure said, "Your guess is right. This is also what this emperor thinks. Are probably just pieces of bricks. The meaning of our birth and growth is ultimately to add bricks and tiles to the endless god realm. Although we don't know who is controlling everything from the outside, nor do we know why the other party would spend such a huge amount of energy and time to construct the endless god realm, this is still very unfair to us, right?" When she spoke of this, Lioli felt very lonely in her heart. Just like the gods who played around with the planes in the god realm, who knew how many lower planes there were within the jurisdiction of the endless god realm. The countless lives in the countless planes had experienced an endless amount of time, but in the end, they were just adding rules to the endless god realm bit by bit. Perhaps, at the moment when the god realm was finally completed, the gods would finally perish and everything would turn into nothingness. When they looked up again, they would just be a plaything for a child from the outside world. However, this child who thought that he was a sovereign was also rising layer after layer, as if there was no end to it, and there was no hope in sight. So far, everything seemed to be going smoothly for her and Qin Guang's desperate struggle, but it was still unknown whether they would be able to achieve their goal in the end. On the other side, Nicole finally nodded. "All right, I agree." On the other side of the void, Qin Guang's body trembled slightly. Just now, he seemed to feel a slight vibration in his body. Originally, his body did not have a physical body. Since it could vibrate, it meant that there was a change. After a long time, Qin Guang could clearly feel that his body was finally starting to slowly become physical again. However, he still could not move, and the changes outside were still continuing. Chapter 1294. On the completely still earth, there were 10 corners that were undergoing strange changes. These corners were scattered all over the world. There were 4 in Wuxia, and the other 6 were either in the depths of the Amazon forest, at the edge of Greenland, or on a small island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or in a hollow in a valley under the Alps. These corners had a lot in common. There were statues that had been erected not long ago, and below the statues sat, knelt, or stood. There were as many as 10,000, and as few as 1,000 people. The statues that they made were the 10 statues that Qin Guang had painstakingly collected in Cloud City. In the real world outside, these man-made statues were almost exactly the same as the statues that Qin Guang had obtained. It was strange that no one had ever seen the 7 statues that Qin Guang had left behind. However, the architects and craftsmen who were responsible for designing and making these statues were able to think of the shapes that they had in their minds from the very beginning. When they had really finished making them, they felt that some of the statues were not very elegant, and even made people feel that they were very strange. For example, an abstract work like half an alto car, ordinary people really couldn't understand it. However, once the shape was decided, no one asked for it to be changed. Of course, it was fortunate that the legendary pile driver idol didn't materialize into a sect and was left in the sea of time. Otherwise, no matter how thick-skinned a person was, they wouldn't be able to accept their idol's appearance. Since it was called a religion, of course, only those who had faith and pursuits would join. They attributed the inspiration of these strange statues to the guidance of God. It was precisely the God that they believed in that was secretly guiding them, That was why they burst forth with this kind of inspiration that ordinary people couldn't understand. However, it was precisely because of this that the incomprehensible statues felt especially unique in their hearts. When they stood under the statues to pray or make a wish, they could feel a stronger power of wish, as if the distance between them and God was invisibly pulled closer. Although the people under the statues were in different postures, these people all had similar expressions on their faces. Slightly squinting their eyes, a tranquil smile on their face, and their lips slightly curled up, they looked so comfortable and carefree, as if they had forgotten all their troubles. Thick, thin, pure white or light green threads extended from the heads of these believers and connected to the statues in front of them. There were still many people around the world who recognized or joined the statue sect who had yet to appear in front of the statue, but this did not stop them from contributing their faith. The same threads of faith spread from all over the world, connecting to the statue from afar. For example, the link between Lu Fei and the half-alto statue was a dark green thread as thick as a thumb. Although she had long since stopped racing cars, this did not prevent her from continuing her hobby. She could always compare other people's achievements with Chen Guang's. However, the more she compared, the more she realized how unsurpassable Chen Guang was. When the power of faith was condensed to the extreme, the 10 statues began to emit a hazy shimmer, and this brilliance became brighter and brighter as time passed. When the brightness exceeded the limit, the statues, which were either made of marble, plated with bronze, or simply made of reinforced concrete, emitted thick smoke at the same time. Thick smoke rose, but the statues disappeared at an extremely fast speed from top to bottom. After the statues disappeared, the threads of faith above everyone's heads disappeared as well, taking away everyone's faith in God. In the void, Chen Guang trembled slightly after obtaining the mechanized and condensed skeleton. He could clearly feel that his body was gradually becoming more substantial. The pixels formed by the fusion of genetic sequences outlined his silhouette, and the mechanical heart that Nicosia gave him formed his skeleton. Now, these beliefs collected from Earth began to supplement his flesh and blood on the foundation of the skeleton. When the 10 statues on Earth completely disappeared, although he still couldn't move, he knew that something had been added to his body. I'm probably a Tetris? Other than lampooning inwardly, Lord Guang could do nothing else. He didn't know that the outside world had been frozen, nor did he know that his 10 statue sect members had built statues for him, and now, the statues had flown away. Following that, the faith formed by the 10 statues seemed to have opened up a mysterious passage. After they passed through, the passage didn't disappear. Soon, the people on Earth changed again. The bald president of the Anti-Light Alliance was sitting on a rattan chair in an outdoor tea house with his legs crossed. The cigarette between his fingers was still curling up, and the cigarette rose from his hand and floated in the air. At a glance, it was in the shape of a dragon. At this moment, he was leaning against the back of the rattan chair with his head raised. His eyes were slightly glazed over, and he seemed to be at a loss. Just a moment ago, he was bragging to his friends about his past glory, about how I was like when I was the president of the Anti-Light Alliance, about how Chen Guang trembled when he saw me, and about how the girls in the Anti-Light Alliance idolized me, blah 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 blah. Of course, everyone knew that he was basically bragging. Everyone knew that he, the president of the Anti-Light Alliance, was the only person who hated Chen Guang. The others were all die-hard fans. Also, there wasn't a single female member in the Anti-Light Alliance. Even if there was, it could only be because he had disguised himself as a woman. His friends didn't laugh at him. Everyone knew that he had been living a bleak life for the past few months. Chen Guang didn't keep a high profile anymore. Instead, he focused on staying in school and being a good student. This caused the Anti-Light Alliance to be at a loss and have nothing to do. That was why the bald president could sit here and chat with his friends. If it was in the past, he would have led his people to chase after Chen Guang and cause trouble wherever he went. At this moment, a white mist was coming out of the bald president's head. This white mist was the strong obsession he had with Chen Guang. The middle-aged men beside him also had smoke coming out of their heads, but it wasn't as thick as the president's. Although these people weren't interested in Chen Guang, They had been indoctrinated by their friends like this every day, so they had no choice but to know about it. At the same time, other than the members of the 10 divine statues sects and those who had previously given faith to Qinguang, there were at least 3 billion people around the world who had smoke coming out of their heads as well. Even if they didn't have much admiration for Qinguang, everyone had more or less heard of him, and this name was in their minds. Now that they were being taken away, it was the faith in Qinguang in their hearts. In the distant depths of the universe, there was a planet that was 70% to 80% similar to Earth. It was about 3 times the size of Earth. On this similarly azure planet, there lived a race that was extremely similar to humans. However, they were slightly shorter and had pointy ears, resembling the elves in fantasy novels. At this moment, in the sacred land of the elves, an emerald green spaceship was slowly rising into the sky. The people on this planet also knew about Qinguang's existence. They even planned to send a spaceship to contact Qinguang. However, before their spaceship could take off, time froze. On this planet, there were also many people with smoke coming out of their heads. The smoke was many times fainter than that of the people on Earth, but it still existed. In the universe, there were at least hundreds of thousands of planets with life that were experiencing the same thing. Humans didn't know that in the vast universe, there were at least hundreds of thousands of cosmic races that were paying attention to everything on Earth. At this moment, all of their faith had gathered together and crossed the infinite distance to slowly fly towards the passage. Qinguang sat up straight and looked down. There was an indescribably complicated expression on his face. After such a long sleep, he finally woke up. However, before he could carefully examine his body, he only felt an irresistible and tyrannical suction force. He heard Azure's voice that he hadn't heard for a long time. "Young man, do your best. There are still 2,813 worlds in cups waiting for you." Qinguang was shocked. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Either we all die or you conquer the entire world within cup." Qinguang said, "I need to discuss this with the spirit of the Holy Grail. At least let me know what's going on." Azure only chuckled. "Why don't you think about it carefully?" Qinguang was at a loss at first. Then, he came to a sudden realization and his face turned ashen. "I've become the spirit of the Holy Grail. I have to conquer myself?" Chapter 1295. He did not have much time to dawdle. Just as he said that in his mind, he was sucked into the space-time tunnel in the next instant. This tunnel was still the same familiar feeling that he had experienced countless times before. There was not much change. The only difference was that when Qinguang stayed in the tunnel previously, he had no way of knowing what the next world in cup looked like. Even though he already knew the specific scope of the world within the cup, it was only a general concept. He had no way of knowing the exact shape of the world within the cup. But this time, he had a very clear picture of the overall structure of the world within the cup. What awaited him now was the world of esports. In the past, Qinguang had trained his Dota Tower technique to perfection in the cup world. However, Dota Tower was only a type of esports, and it could only be considered as one of the MOBAs. It couldn't represent all esports. Right now, Qinguang would be facing the advanced version of esports in the 3rd stage of the Yunxiang Cup. He would have to train in all the esports realms from the day he was born, including, but not limited to, CS, Soccer, CF, Dota, LOL, Kings of Glory, and so on. Even PUBG, which had recently become popular, would be in the list. Qinguang was very puzzled. If he remembered correctly, he had not pursued anything in the game for a long time. Why did the world in cup suddenly give him a mission for no reason? However, he did not feel any pressure. It was a game after all. It was a test of the player's on-the-spot reaction, tactical thinking, and other qualities. There would be some differences between different types, but there were many similarities in essence. For example, in the recent super popular PUBG games, retired professional Dota and LOL players learned faster than ordinary players, and their relative standards were also higher. This was the reason why Qinguang had now reached the peak of Dota, and then went on to dabble in RTS, FPS, and sports games. His starting point was very high. Thus, this time, in the world in the cup, he was able to learn very quickly, much faster than before. Back then, he had trained hard in the small pool for several years. Now that he was in the third tier of the Elephant Sky Cup, the small pool had become the esports training center. The computer equipment hadn't been upgraded much, but his sparring partners were many times better than the computer people back then. The consciousness of all the famous top players in the history of competitive gaming were perfectly copied into the game. The Human Emperor, Beast King, and Moon Devil in World of Warcraft, the Hierarch and Flash in StarCraft. In short, anything you wanted was there. No one had ever been able to enjoy such comprehensive training as Qin Guang. Even if it was just an ordinary person with such an opportunity, they would at least be able to train to the semi-professional level. Moreover, Qin Guang's talent was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He played all kinds of games at an extremely fast speed, averaging one game every 2 weeks. He absolutely crushed everything. During the whole process of the challenge, Qin Guang had a feeling in his heart. Even though he was fighting with the advanced artificial intelligence created by the world in the cup, he felt like he was fighting with his left and right hands. This was probably why Azure said he had become the spirit of the Holy Grail. At this time, the electronic notification sound was gone. There was no need for it. He knew how far things had gone. Throwing the keyboard in his hand, Qin Guang got up and stretched. Then, in the process of stretching, his body was sucked into the space-time tunnel. He didn't need any reminder at all. He knew in his heart whether he was done or not. This time, he didn't even have time to rest. After finishing one, he went straight to the next. The Cloud Sky Cup's world in the cup far surpassed One Line Sky in terms of area and quality of the world structure. Of course, the ability that Qin Guang needed to train was also far beyond One Line Sky and One Line Sky. After becoming the strongest esports player in human history, he didn't even get to be proud for a few minutes before he was suppressed by the new world in the cup. Even though the old man had boasted that he was a top student, it didn't mean that he really wanted to be a top student. I'm about to become a god. I'm about to defy the heavens. I'm about to conquer the divine realm. I'm clearly a city boy turned into a fantasy male pig. What's the use of learning this? Now you're telling me that I want to learn mathematics? That's right, the world in front of him was the world of mathematics. Qin Guang was very hurt. He wasn't afraid of hardship, tiredness, or difficulties. As long as he could become stronger, anything was fine. Whether it was the innate talent ability of the past or the new version of innate strength, it didn't lose to the so-called mathematics in terms of profoundness. In terms of cultivation, every time he wanted to take a step forward, he had to thoroughly understand the entire set of cultivation techniques. Now that the rules were involved, he had to go through all of them in his mind and understand them one by one. In the past, when he practiced martial arts in the realm of true force, the various ancient books he faced were all unpredictable and difficult to understand. There were often situations where he could understand every single word but couldn't understand a whole sentence. Just reading the ancient books was difficult enough, let alone learning them. This was countless times more difficult than simply reading and learning. Every step required an extremely strong talent and a crazy brain burn. Even so, he still learned it all. But now, he was asked to learn mathematics from beginning to end like a student. He felt that it was meaningless and wanted to protest. I know that mathematics is known as the foundation of science. All theoretical research can be attributed to mathematics. There are even theoretical masters who can use mathematics to explain the evolution of the universe, species evolution, or space-time wormholes. Otherwise, they can directly calculate the density of the illusory antimatter. But theory is theory after all. No matter how profound it is, it can only stay on paper. Unless all aspects of science and technology keep up, even if someone jumps out and brings humanity's mathematics level forward by 300 years, it's basically useless. 1 step ahead is a genius, 10 steps ahead is a lunatic, 300 years ahead is basically a hole to bury. No matter what you say, others can't understand it at all. What's the use? I protest. Can I not learn? My protest was unsurprisingly ineffective. About 300 years later, Chen Guang became the most comprehensive mathematician in human history after Archimedes, Newton, Gauss, Euler, and Riemann. Perhaps his mathematical talent was completely inferior to those who were known as the king of mathematics, the prince of mathematics, or the god of mathematics, but he could use a full 300 years to learn. The first 200 years were all kinds of force-feeding, the last 100 years were summarized, and then he became a master. Don't ask me what 1 plus 1 is. Such a profound question. I can only tell you clearly that it is equal to 2. Don't you admire me? The legendary gold box conjecture that has baffled mankind for many years was solved by me. What? You want me to prove it? I can prove it, but you can't understand it. You won't understand it anyway, so you just need to know the result. Don't look at me with that kind of admiration. I just have a small achievement. In short, after spending hundreds of years, Chen Guang did indeed reach unprecedented heights in the subject of mathematics. Even the 3 major conjectures that had troubled mankind for hundreds of years had no difficulty in front of him. Unfortunately, at this time, he could only be in a rather depressed state. If he could go out and return to the real world, he would have 10,000 ways to show off in his mind. But right now, he could not go out, and he had to continue to strive for the next world within a cup. Defeating oneself was not the most difficult thing, but after defeating oneself, one could not tell others how bad *SS1 was. Forget it, I'll just leave it at that. What I'm doing now is called practicing internal energy. After I succeed, I'll go out and show off. Anyway, I know more and more, I will be able to use it sooner or later. Imagine standing on the street by yourself. First, you kill all the cunning people in the park who set up chess stalls to cheat money. Then, you go back and shock the math Olympiad students who meet in the park. When the others still haven't recovered from their shock, you can pat the shoulder of the financial gold collar who is walking next to you in a suit and tell him which stocks are going to crash and which stocks are going to hit the upper limit today. Then he would turn around and take out his phone. He would then write a program on his phone and solve the uncanny valley phenomenon that had troubled programmers and filmmakers for many years. He would make the 3D idols on the computer go from data to reality. After that, he would go find Jiang Yage and Jin Shirue to sing a song together. Cough cough. The third realm he faced in the Cloud Elephant Heavenly Cup was the realm of singing. After being tortured by his own wailing and howling, Chen Guang, who was tone deaf and had negative talent, finally embarked on the path of a real singer, no, a singing machine. In the blink of an eye, many years had passed. He had gone through a total of 243 Cloud Elephant Cups. From challenging the rules of the Holy Grail to challenging himself, Chen Guang's biggest discovery was that he no longer had the possibility of dying from failure. In the past, he would have died 7 or 8 times in the first world within the Heavenly Spirit Cup, let alone the third world within the Cloud Elephant Cup. At most, he would have died dozens of times. But now, he had gone through 243 Cloud Elephant Cups in one go without dying even once. Even if there was a temporary failure, such as when he opened his mouth in the realm of singing, a rain of knives rained down from the sky. His body should have been riddled with holes, but not only did the rain of knives fail to stab him to death, they even fell directly into his body. That's right, after they fell on his head, shoulders, or hands, they were forcefully absorbed by his body, like a sponge absorbing water. At first, he was worried that he would die after having so many iron elements forcefully shoved into his body. It was only when he felt bloated that a metal spear popped out from his, but after he farted that he felt at ease. At that time, he thought that he was having diarrhea and had an accident. In the end, before he could come to his senses, he propped himself up from the ground. This was a terrible feeling. The knives rained down from the sky, and there was still a continuous stream of knives entering his body. The metal spear under his butt became thicker and thicker, pushing him higher and higher. It was only when he was dozens of meters above the ground that the rain of knives finally stopped. Only then did Chen Guang break free from the metal spear and slide down this flagpole back to the ground. Similar situations occurred in the other Cloud Elephant Cups as well. There were all sorts of strange situations, but the results were the same. Although the process was extremely tortuous, he did not die even once. The settings in the cup realm that were specially designed to punish him and take his life were completely ineffective against him. After completing the Cloud Elephant Cup, Chen Guang thought that what awaited him next would be the fourth Clear Sky Cup realm. However, after he jumped out of the space-time tunnel, what appeared in front of him was a super simplified version of the Sword Spirit Sky. Chen Guang immediately understood that after completing the current realm, he was here to clear his debts. What awaited him were 2093 middle realms of the Heavenly Spirit Seeing Cup. There was a saying that out of the 365 professions, there would be a master in every profession. The world was so big now, and there were definitely more than 365 professions in every profession. Even 3,650 professions would not be enough. The Heavenly Holy Grail focused on training all kinds of abilities that could be put into practical use. Although Chen Guang already knew a lot of them, and even felt that most of them were useless, he did not have the right to refuse. The toughest pen calligraphy, brush calligraphy, the best ping pong, the best glass marble, the best trash collection, the best professional sewer dredging, the best fruit platter. In short, in the 2093 Clear Sky Cup's realm, Chen Guang's worldview was greatly impacted. If he had not experienced it himself, he would probably never have imagined that there were so many unorthodox methods in this world. He also remembered that Colored had once said that when the Heavenly Holy Grail created missions, it would often use the ideas in its mind as a basis. Now that he had to face more than 2,000 Clear Sky Cups in one go, he had almost squeezed out all the experience he had in the real world, which was not very long. The Heavenly Holy Grail had racked his brains just to gather enough numbers. He really regretted knowing so much. Why didn't he avoid the small advertisements on the street when he saw them? Instead, he stared at them carefully a few times. The best treatment for condyloma acuminatum, infertility, sigh. I'm really, actually quite broken down. Chapter 1296. In any case, regardless of whether these skills and abilities were meaningful or not, it took Chen Guang a long time to complete the 2093 middle realm of the Heavenly Spirit Cup. Thankfully, the strongest ability that he feared the most didn't appear. Otherwise, he would have died from anal prolapse. After that, he didn't have any time to rest. What awaited him were the 727 middle realms of the Heavenly Spirit Cup. Compared to the first level, the second level of the world in the cup covered a larger area, and the training ability was also more concise. For example, the previously separate hard brush calligraphy and brush calligraphy were directly summarized into one word in the one-line sky, calligraphy. Under the conditions of the one-line sky's cup, Chen Guang, who had already mastered it, didn't need to stick to hard brush or soft brush, or even if he didn't have a brush at all. As long as he wanted to leave traces of calligraphy on a surface, whatever he took out would be very artistic and powerful. The strongest table tennis was also upgraded to the strongest small ball game. Not only did it include table tennis, badminton, tennis, dodgeball, as long as it was a small ball, he could play it. He had mastered the piano in the past, and in the One-Line Sky Cup, the Heavenly Holy Grail simply made his skills more comprehensive. After some hard training, he became proficient in all musical instruments. Not only did he have the piano, but he also had the electronic organ, the zither, the moon zither, the violin, the cello, the harmonica, and even the horsehead zither, as well as the big harp that the mermaid hugged in her arms. This Heavenly Holy Grail was also very practical. As long as there was the word musical in its name, it would be accepted in the One-Line Sky Cup. In fact, the order was already reversed. In the previous Cloud Elephant Heavenly Cup, he had already learned all kinds of musical instruments, including but not limited to wind instruments, plucked instruments, percussion instruments, string instruments, and so on. Although there were musical instruments, there were also mouth-blowing instruments, and there were even unorthodox instruments like the accordion. However, Chen Guang had been exposed to all kinds of musical instruments before, and he had even obtained the strongest certification that surpassed ISO 9001 in the cup realm. Now that he had changed the classification of the second stage of One-Line Sky, it was not completely meaningless. Instead, he realized that after the certification of Cloud Elephant Sky, he actually had 2 more certifications of One Line Sky, further strengthening his training to the extreme. In the past, no matter what skills he learned, most of them relied on the force-feeding method of teaching to hammer the skill to the extreme. However, after training in Spirit Sky, One Line Sky, and Cloud Elephant Sky, any skill that had overlapping training brought him an indescribable strengthening effect. If the results of the first level of training in the Sky of Seeing Spirit could be said to be close to the Tao, then the training in the Sky of Frontiers would become the natural Tao, and the training in the Sky of Clouds would become the Tao that could connect with the gods. Layer after layer of training allowed his achievements in a certain matter to be continuously stacked, and in the end, it formed a magnified effect. In the past, when he played the piano, he could use the tempestuous rhythm to make people worship him, unable to look directly at him. But now, after a long period of study, his talent in music, which was originally equivalent to the standard of an ordinary person, or even worse, had been unleashed to the extreme. He had reached another realm. As the saying goes, the stupid bird flies first. Even the stupidest bird would be able to fly to a place where others would be left in the dust. In the past, Chen Guang had boasted that his talent in music was 0, so he had never called himself a master pianist. He had always thought of himself as a craftsman, because he could only play existing songs and not compose them. But now he was different. After going through the repeated special training in the first 3 stages of the Holy Grail, his talent in music had been infinitely magnified. The current him had long since mastered the skills of composing music, and could even raise his hand to play super music that no one had ever done before on the piano. Whether it was impassioned, slow and melodious, or passionate, or cold and strange music styles, he could easily play them all. These songs were guaranteed to be unique in human history, and any one of them was enough to drive pianists all over the world crazy. They would have to spend at least 10 years, or at most several decades to study and analyze them, and then they would discover to their shock that this was actually the next stage of art. However, musical skills were only one of the more than 200 major skills that he had mastered. Under the more than 200 major skills, he still had more than 700 minor skills, and more than 2,100 minor skills. In human history, there had been many, many fields of learning, such as literature and art, painting and art, architecture, military affairs, philosophy, governance, engineering, science, and so on. In modern times, various subjects had been further expanded, and any comprehensive university would have dozens of majors. For example, the Gokyo University that Chen Guang studied in was a representative example. Further down, literature and art could also be divided into poems, songs, novels, plays, operas, and so on. These kinds of classifications would also diverge according to region and era. For example, Shakespeare's plays and the operas of the Yuan dynasty were 2 completely different things. Further back, Homer's epics and Chu Yuan's songs of the South were 2 completely different things. As for scientific knowledge, it was even more complicated. In universities, there were all kinds of basic subjects such as materials science, chemistry, mechanics, computer science, physics, chemistry, and so on, or environmental science, which was a very comprehensive but very specific branch subject. Each of these subjects was enough for a person to exhaust their entire life to learn, and yet still not see the end. Through the previous 3 stages of the world within Cup, Chen Guang had grasped all sorts of knowledge in his mind. At this moment, he was standing at the pinnacle of human history in every field. It could even be said that he had completely surpassed this era by 1,000 years. Even if the current human beings exhausted the power of the entire Earth, exhausted the current 7 billion people, in the future they might reach the wisdom of 10 or even 20 billion people, it would still take a whole 1,000 years to catch up to his current knowledge. Fortunately, he could not find anyone to compare himself to. Otherwise, just the pretentiousness that emanated from his entire body would be enough to make others explode on the spot. Chen Guang felt that there was something wrong with his brain. Of course, he had always been abnormal. Otherwise, how could his brain contain so many memories, so much knowledge and knowledge? Even if it was forced in through force feeding, there was still a limit to the capacity of a person's brain. No matter how complex and unimaginable the structure of the brain was, connecting one hard drive after another with brackets and building a data center the size of a football field would still exceed the limits of the human brain's structure, and it would not be able to contain so much knowledge. But now, after the frenzied training of the first 3 worlds of the heavenly Holy Grail, Chen Guang realized that there was no limit to his brain, and he even had a very strong sense of hunger. He wanted more. Even though his brain already contained almost all the knowledge since the birth of human civilization, he was still not satisfied. When the 4th world of the heavenly Holy Grail, which was also the true world within the heavenly Holy Grail, appeared in front of him, he suddenly came to a realization. It was no wonder that when he wanted to practice martial arts, the heavenly Holy Grail would give him the power realm of the heavenly Holy Grail and the worldview framework of the 8th heaven, which was also the realm of true force. It turned out that the first 3 worlds of the heavenly Holy Grail were simply to build a foundation for himself. Only after reaching the 4th world, the heavenly Holy Grail, would he truly be able to break away from humanity and evolve in a supernatural direction. Strictly speaking, inner strength martial arts were already a supernatural power, but there were also great limitations in the past. There were very few people who could master it, and the degree of mastery was not deep either. In the real world, reaching the master realm like Wen was already the limit. It was only when Chen Guang himself appeared that this limit was broken. The 4th world, the heavenly Holy Grail, had truly opened up a completely different picture of him from the past. At the same time, Chen Guang's horizons were instantly raised to another level. Sitting cross-legged in the space-time tunnel, the various events of the past flashed across the depths of his mind. He could not help but sigh to himself. Although he had been at the lowest end of the first 3 heavens for a very long period of time, he had made his way through the many worlds within the cups, especially the last few times he came into contact with the Protoss, and the incomparably long period of time after he was smacked to death by the Master God of Chaos. All of these stacked together to build such a solid foundation for him today. No wonder the Protoss could project themselves. That laughable principal will of the heavenly Holy Grail actually thought that he had schemed against me? Little did you know, it was the heavenly Holy Grail that let you in. Chapter 1297. The space-time tunnel leading to the 4th realm of the Azure Sky Cup seemed to be extraordinarily long, at least twice as long as before. Only when he floated to the last half of the tunnel did Chen Guang finally understand the reason. Before he fell into the Azure Sky Cup, which was set to be an interstellar world, Chen Guang could vaguely see a huge flat surface floating next to the newly formed Azure Sky Cup. If the Azure Sky Cup, which was created by the heavenly Holy Grail, appeared to be a basketball-sized sphere in the void, then the huge inclined plane floating next to it was definitely larger than the Pacific Ocean. Chen Guang understood with a single glance at this flat shape. Isn't this my true martial world? It seemed that after he had completely fused with the heavenly Holy Grail, he had the ability to jump out of the Azure Sky Cup and stand outside to observe the small world. Sure enough, the Azure Sky Cup was worthy of being the 8th realm of the immortal heavens. Although the true force domain was only born in the 4th realm, its world structure and size far exceeded the normal 4th realm of the Azure Sky Cup. Chen Guang looked down again, and sure enough, he saw more than 2,000 stars below. Every one of them was the Azure Sky Cup, which had been created by the heavenly Holy Grail. He looked up and saw a pool of water that had been inexplicably cut into a circle above the Azure Sky Cup. Chen Guang's mind moved, and he actually refused to immediately enter the next Azure Sky Cup. Instead, he jumped out and floated in the void. He floated up to the pool of water that was suspended in the air. There were no containers around, but this pool of water was in a regular circle. Using the true force domain as a reference, the total area of this pool of water should be 3 times that of the true force domain, and its depth was equivalent to the Earth's mantle. There were a lot of dust floating on the surface of the water, which were actually small islands. Chen Guang focused his eyes, and his eyes continued to expand like a magnified Google map. The islands on the surface of the water gradually became clear in his eyes. He was staring at the sage's island, where his statue stood. Sage Right Chen's statue was brand new. Every once in a while, the people in the Shuzhou Sea would renovate this statue. Annie and Brooke were nowhere to be seen on the Sage Island. They were probably reincarnated. Who knows which corner of the Sea of Moments they were cultivating? On the other hand, Chen Guang saw old Bob donning luxurious clothes and giving orders in the plaza. Many people were busy under his orders, and it seemed like he was intending to renovate the plaza. Old Bob looked at the statue from time to time, his eyes still filled with admiration. It seemed that even though many years had passed, and he had died and been reborn countless times, perhaps even losing his memories for many lifetimes in between, wasting his life away like an ordinary person, old Bob was still able to recover his memories from time to time. He knew who it was that turned him from a vagrant at the bottom of the Sea of Moments into the high priest of the Sage Temple. Suddenly, old Bob's body trembled as he turned to look into the depths of the void. All he saw was a blue sky with white clouds. A few seagulls were flying happily in the sky. In that instant, he felt as if he was being watched. This was a very familiar gaze that made him feel warm and intoxicated in the depths of his heart. This feeling had been lost for a long time, but it was unforgettable, just like when great Sage Right stood by his side before he left. In the void, Qin Guang smiled knowingly. He didn't expect that even though he was outside the world, old Bob would still be able to sense his gaze. It seemed that even though he had left for a long time, the influence he left behind in the Sea of Moments was still strong and hadn't weakened with the passage of time. Not only that, Chen Guang also saw a statue on the other side of the island that made him feel particularly embarrassed. It was the statue of the strongest pile driver, built on the ruins of the Sage Island that he and Annie had destroyed. The people of the Sea of Moments had reclaimed the island and rebuilt it, and 1 billion years ago, they had created this statue. This was the work of Lady Annie. According to what Annie had said at the time, when she woke up, she received a message in her dreams from the great sage who had gone to a higher plane. He had encountered a big problem and needed help from the people of the Sea of Moments. This help required the people of the Sea of Moments to provide him with the power of faith and worship. In order to transmit this power to him across the plane barrier, a total of 3 mediums were needed. One of them was the place where he had played the piano for the first time in the Sea of Moments. There, the strong had rebuilt a statue of the piano god. The second was his statue on the square of the Sage Island. As long as people continuously prayed and cultivated under the statue, the willpower in their souls would be continuously transmitted through the statue, providing assistance to the great sage. The third medium was this newly built pile driver statue. Well, this was actually a giant penis. According to Lady Annie, this thing's body structure was exactly the same as the great sage's. That angry dragon with its head raised towards the sky, that sinister appearance with blue veins popping out, it all showed how terrifying and outstanding the great sage's ability in this aspect was. It was no wonder that the two of them had frequently destroyed the Sage Island. Their battle prowess was truly unimaginable. If the people of the Sea of Moments wanted to provide assistance to the great sage, they needed to stand under the statue and continuously worship the great sage's ability in that aspect. That's right, it was the legendary super strong. Worship. Especially when it came to girls, the effect of worship was the strongest, and the more help they could provide to the great sage. Well, I have to add one more, it's best if it's a pure girl. As for why? Standing in the void, Chen Guang's face was slightly red. Because in a sense, the Sea of Moments was a world born from his will. Even though the rules of this world weren't complete, it was definitely in line with his subconscious. This meant that even though he was known as a womanizer, he was actually a selfish and shameless Virgo. As for the willpower and faith provided by the people of the Sea of Moments through the 3 mediums, it was actually the same as the faith provided by the statue sect on Earth through the 10 statues. Even though the quality wasn't as good as the people on Earth, it was superior in quantity. It was also an important part of his body when he revived. Thinking of this, Chen Guang felt even more ashamed. Ever since he left the Sea of Moments, even though Chen Guang had looked into the Sea of Moments time and time again, his real body had never returned. He didn't make any contributions or help to the people of this world, but the people of the Sea of Moments, after going through such a long period of time and countless reincarnations, their worship and reverence towards him didn't weaken at all, but instead became even stronger. Now, they were even giving their all for him without any complaints or regrets. Even though their lives were born because of him, the shackles of fate that shrouded their heads were also existences that he had forcefully placed on their heads. If one day he could use the identity of the transcendent Holy Grail to transcend all shackles, at that time, he would think of a way to forcefully raise the level of the Sea of Moments to another level. At the very least, he would make this plane reach the same level as Earth. This could be considered as compensation to the people of this plane. Chen Guang's gaze left the Sea of Moments and looked up again. Above him, there were two different shapes of space floating. Taking into account the size of the Pacific Ocean of the true martial domain again, the volume of these two spaces reflected in the void of the transcendent Holy Grail was simply too large to be calculated. Chen Guang knew that the ellipsoidal shape of these two planes should be the Earth universe after merging with the real world. The other plane structure should be the world of fate that he had a glimpse of in the past. On both sides of these two planes, there were 7 plane balls that still seemed to be in a state of chaos. Now, these plane balls were round, but Chen Guang understood that it was only because these 7 plane worlds hadn't been activated by him yet. After activation, they would take on a real shape like the real world and the life realm. They could be polygonal crystals, or they could be layers of floating islands, or they could be a large space in the shape of a 5-speed electric fan. The biggest gain from this discovery was that it allowed him to clearly understand one thing. There were exactly 9 special worlds like the real world and the world of fate. Although he had expected it before, it was better to see it with his own eyes now. In addition, the distribution of these 9 special worlds in a circle looked exactly the same as the 9 ancient wells he had seen in the true martial realm before his death. In other words, the 9 immortals' peaks of the Master God of Chaos were placed in the same order and position. It seemed that the 9 stars' interlocking formation must have a very special meaning in the endless heavenly realm. After confirming this discovery, Chen Guang once again magnified his gaze like an infinitely magnifying glass and slowly landed on the Earth in the real universe. With his complete resurrection, the originally still time on the Earth began to flow again. The millions of human players that were sealed in the true martial domain also successfully returned to the real world with the help of the 9 ancient wells that had reappeared. Of course, these 9 ancient wells weren't the 9 immortals' peak, but the reactivated transcendent Holy Grail was a game item that repaired itself according to Chen Guang's own subconscious. However, 2 people were missing. Chen Guang and Wang Lin didn't return. Chen Guang didn't return because he had completely merged with the transcendent Holy Grail. As for Wang Lin, it was because she was completely dead from her soul to her imprint. Her body in the real world had completely disintegrated the moment time began to flow again. A trace of sorrow flashed through Chen Guang's heart, but he quickly adjusted his state of mind. After his rebirth, he had been madly polished by nearly 3,000 small worlds, and his entire soul and body had been completely reconstructed for 1 billion years. His state of mind had long undergone a fundamental change. Even though Wang Lin was now dead, as long as he could achieve his goal, it wouldn't be difficult for him to suppress and transcend the shackles of the endless heavenly realm and reconstruct Wang Lin's life after turning back time. In addition, Chen Guang also realized that he seemed to have left the scope of the game system. He had clearly left the Earth, but the game did not stop. Instead, it appeared on the Earth at a faster rate than before. In addition, after nearly half of the players died in the world of jumping off the building, the total number of human players had been replenished by 10 million in the next mission that appeared immediately after. Although these people were all newcomers, they were equally talented. With the help of the veteran players, the human players were still able to make their way in the game's mission space. For a time, Chen Guang was speechless. From the looks of it, there were 2 completely parallel game systems in the Transcendent Holy Grail. One was his own world in the cup, and the other was the game space for human players and Protoss players. Chapter 1298. Previously, he had thought that the game system of the human players would have either collapsed or stopped after he had cleared the world in cup in batches. However, it seemed that things were not as simple as he thought. The two systems could exist in parallel and complement each other. Chen Guang used the Heavenly Holy Grail to investigate the process of several quests. He discovered that the game system provided the human and Protoss players with a test that was completely based on the order in which he had cleared the levels. Up until now, the players from both sides had cleared more than 10 World in Cup, while the players from both sides had cleared 5 or 6 World in Cup. They had followed the order in which he had cleared the World in Cloud Elephant Cup. The World in Cloud Elephant Cup was extremely difficult. Both the human and Protoss players had suffered heavy losses. However, the setting of the Heavenly Holy Grail seemed to require the number of players to be constant. Even if the human players lost millions of players, the next time the World in Cup was intermittently opened, the total number of players would be replenished to 9,999,999. It was the same for the Protoss players. When Chen Guang and the Master God of Chaos met, the 3,333,333 Protoss projections from the celestial realm had all perished. However, they were replenished with the next quest. After completing the Cloud Elephant Heavenly Cup, they would return to the Seeing Spirit Sky level Cup world in the Cup to challenge it. Chen Guang estimated that after all the players had cleared the world in Cloud Elephant Cup, it would be easier for them to return to the Sky of Spirits level. This situation was very similar to his own situation. He would first give the players a difficult quest to help them grow, and then send them back to the beginner's village to strengthen their foundations. After they had completed the 2093 World in Cloud Elephant Cup, they would directly jump to the Sky of Spirits level, the 4th World in Cloud Elephant Cup, just like himself. When that time came, the players would probably suffer heavy losses again. However, Chen Guang could not even protect himself now. He could only watch and could not continue to protect the human players. However, judging from the recent developments, he felt a lot more at ease. The performance of the human players was not as bad. Many died, but there were also many who kept leveling up. There were a total of 7 billion people on Earth. Up until now, every realm in the Cup had lost an average of 2 million players. Therefore, even if the players in the Heavenly Holy Grail trials could not be repeated and dying once was equivalent to being completely eliminated, the humans on Earth would still be able to endure the realm in the Cup 3,500 times. Even if the number of casualties fluctuated, there would still be at least 500 casualties left. In the later stages of the world within a cup, even if the difficulty increased, the player's abilities would continue to improve. As a result, the casualty rate wouldn't necessarily increase. In fact, it might even decrease. In addition, Chen Guang had a feeling that perhaps the fundamental purpose of the Heavenly Holy Grail's setting was to make all humans become players for once. He also discovered something else. When he was resurrected in the Holy Grail after 1 billion years, the time in the outside world did not stop. The humans who were extracted to become players did not show any obvious abnormalities in the outside world. Their previous identity, their personality in the real world, and their social circle did not change at all in these few months. At first, Chen Guang thought that the Heavenly Holy Grail had set up a substitute for every player who was selected. In these few months, the substitute would take over the player's original body and play the role of the player in real life. He thought that these substitute consciousnesses were not real humans. They should be virtual consciousnesses derived from the Heavenly Holy Grail. They were similar to artificial intelligence but more advanced and could be passed off as real. However, when Chen Guang truly investigated what had happened in the past, especially after reading the reports about himself, he changed his mind. He seemed to have been mistaken about one thing. When he entered the realm in the cup, although his main consciousness had indeed left his body, it did not mean that his body had become an empty shell without a soul. To be precise, his consciousness was split into two. The dominant part entered the Heavenly Holy Grail, while the subconscious and the surface layer of consciousness remained in his body. He did not realize this before because the time in the outside world had almost stopped when he entered the realm in the cup. The time he stayed in there was too short. The outside world did not have time to change, and his body did not need to do anything before he came out. This time was different. He and many other players were trapped in the realm in the cup. The main consciousness had left his body for too long, and the time in the outside world continued to move forward. The secondary consciousness had no choice but to take over the command of the body. However, this secondary consciousness did not know that it was secondary at all. It would occasionally feel an inexplicable sense of emptiness. Now that the players had successfully left, the main consciousness had returned and completely devoured and fused with the secondary consciousness. Of course, this included the memories of this period. During the process of fusion, the secondary consciousness did not feel anything. It did not even know that it was being fused. The main consciousness, on the other hand, had some feelings. It even felt a little strange. It was not sure if it was really itself during that period of time. However, this was not a big deal. In any case, Chen Guang's secondary consciousness did not have any inappropriate thoughts. In fact, he was like a saint. In the past few months, he had not done anything with anyone of the opposite sex. He was rather pure. Now, everyone else had gone back, but he was completely gone. It seemed that when he died under the palm of the Master God of Chaos, his body in the real world also disintegrated into nothingness. Fortunately, the memory of his resurrection was transmitted over at the same time. Otherwise, he would have lost a part of it. When Chen Guang checked this part of the memory, he felt ashamed of his subconscious's decency. The secondary consciousness was the most perfect actor in this dimension. Even though the secondary consciousness would never have any emotional fluctuations, like a pool of stagnant water, in the eyes of others, it was almost no different from itself. It could even fool the people closest to it. This perfect control left Chen Guang in awe. No, why did this absolute calm state of mind feel so familiar? Chen Guang's body trembled. Wasn't this exactly the same as the character displayed by the electronic voice in the Holy Grail? Could it be that the spirit of the Holy Grail was my subconscious from the very beginning? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. Now that he had completely fused with the Grail, the original spirit of the Holy Grail had disappeared. Logically speaking, since the Holy Grail was known as a supreme artifact, it must have a spirit. The spirit of a supreme artifact had to be at the same level as a God Emperor, or even stronger. There was no reason for it to be swallowed and replaced so easily. It should at least put up a fight, right? But the truth was that he did not feel anything during this process. It was as simple and casual as opening his eyes after waking up every morning. This meant that the spirit of the Holy Grail did not resist at all. Or perhaps, the moment his consciousness was awakened, the spirit of the Holy Grail was absorbed seamlessly. Just like how the main consciousness of players swallowed the secondary consciousness when they returned to the real world? As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, he quickly convinced himself. The more Chen Guang thought about it, the more he felt that it made sense. Then, another thought appeared in his mind. If this theory was correct, then there would be a paradox. According to Lazuli, the Holy Grail had existed for an unknown number of years. The spirit of the Holy Grail should have existed for roughly the same amount of time as the Holy Grail, so it must be an ancient antique among antiques. But it had only been a little more than 20 years since he was born. This was very unreasonable and unscientific. I haven't even been born yet, but my secondary consciousness was already born. Is my subconscious so capable? Why don't I ascend to the heavens? Wait a minute. Could it be that I was originally the reincarnation of an almighty being from the endless realm of the gods? It was impossible for me to reincarnate. After all, the levels of the planes are different. But there was another possibility, and that was that I was originally a powerhouse from the endless realm of the gods. Then, that's right, that must be it. Since the endless realm of the gods was also a cage, then with the temper of the old man, he would definitely not be able to tolerate it. So, I chose to first create this Holy Grail, then self-destruct on the spot. Then I descended to this special Earth universe and used the Holy Grail to cause trouble. My ultimate goal was to break free from the Holy Grail, and at the same time, cause trouble with the origin of the God realm, and then transcend the god realm? No wonder Lazuli, who is a divine emperor, is so friendly to a loser like me. It's obvious that Lazuli is my old lover from the god realm. Lazuli, am I right? He shouted in his heart. But no one paid attention to him. Lazuli didn't move at all. It didn't matter. Right now, the holes in his brain were working crazily. He was analyzing everything that had happened since he obtained the Holy Grail at an extremely fast speed. No wonder Divine Emperor Yu Ting and the others said that he was a traitor. No wonder they inexplicably thought that he would cause serious damage to the endless realm of the gods. So things should have been like this from the beginning. How much of a genius did I have to be in the past to be able to create such a tough setting like the Holy Grail? Even if the origin of the god realm wanted to kill me, it could only follow my rules and find trouble with me in the Holy Grail. In the end, it was still plotted against by me. In addition, if I was really the reincarnation of some almighty being, then the memory of my previous life should be very strong, and my will should be indestructible. But why can't I remember anything until now? Am I still me? However, Qin Guang was baffled by this. He really had 10,000 questions that he wanted to get answers from Lazuli, but she didn't move at all. Forget it, the boat will cross the bridge when it comes to it. After daydreaming for a while, Chen Guang turned his attention back to the game mission that many human and Protoss players were participating in. He always felt that there were more articles in this game space that was parallel to the world in the cup. Maybe when he completely understood the relationship between this game and the world in the cup, he would understand the true mystery. Chapter 1299. Chen Guang's eyebrows were tightly knitted together. He was constantly analyzing the current situation in his mind. Clearly, time had been falsified once again. His resurrection had taken a total of 1 billion years in the realm of true force, which was about 4 months in the real world. Then, during these 4 months, all the human players should have been trapped in the realm of true force, and the Protoss players should have been wiped out. However, according to the real history that he had found, during these 4 months, neither the human players nor the Protoss players had stopped the progress of the game quest. The Protoss players did not repeat at all. Yu Ting and 8 Directions, who had died before, did not reappear. Instead, they were replaced by the newly selected God Emperor and many low-level Protoss. The human players were partially repeated. The players who were still alive in the realm of true force when Qin Guang disappeared also existed in the following game quests. Those who had died were replaced by others. This meant that during this period of time, there were paradoxes that contradicted each other, and the logic was in chaos. Whether it was the consciousness in the realm of true force or the consciousness participating in the world in a cup, they should all be the same main consciousness. The main consciousness of the players in the realm of true force existed in 2 timelines at the same time. One of them was trapped in the realm of true force, living in that huge world step by step, participating in the natural evolution of the realm of true force from all aspects. The other existed in the real world, following the previous settings, participating in the game quests every once in a while, competing with the Protoss players, and completing the game's quests. This was obviously a very unreasonable situation. It was as if 2 identical parallel worlds had been created out of thin air. Or, it was as if a road had abruptly branched off into 2 different directions in the process of extending forward. It was just like the cars driving on the fork and the passengers inside were completely overlapping, but the scenery on both sides of the road was very different. When the players in the realm of true force returned to the real world, they absorbed 2 kinds of memories about the real world. One of them was the player's secondary consciousness waiting for the end of the quest in a daze for the past 4 months. The other was the main consciousness of the other timeline, participating in the game quests at a normal pace for 4 months. Logically speaking, these 2 kinds of memories should conflict with each other and even cause schizophrenia. However, the reality was that these 2 completely different and contradictory memories easily merged together without any hindrance. In the player's newly formed memories, the billions of years they had spent in the realm of true force were compressed into an extremely short period of time. This period of time was extremely short, infinitely close to nothing. If time was a line, it had length but no width. However, the compressed memory was only equivalent to a dot in real life. A dot had no length and was infinitely close to zero. The overlapping memories in real life were cleverly connected together, so that all the players who participated in the true martial domain and the real world at the same time could live in the outside world at the same time, but at the same time enter the game world regularly. It should have been impossible, but under the control of the Holy Grail that transcended the rules of the real universe, it was truly so ingenious and seamless that it connected seamlessly. Apart from Qin Guang, who was a bystander, no one noticed anything unusual. He had been delayed outside the space-time tunnel for too long. The suction force from the fourth layer of the realm of Clear Sky Cup was getting stronger and stronger. At first, it was effortless for Qin Guang to resist it. But after a long time, this force kept increasing, and now it was enough to pull down microscopic particles from the surface of his body. He thought that since he had already investigated enough, he would continue to study the situation of the human players after he completed this realm of Clear Sky Cup. Logically speaking, now that Qin Guang had stepped onto the broad road of breaking through at the speed of light, the life or death of the human players was actually not important to him. But he could not let it go. He did not know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. Even his species had changed. Perhaps only his appearance was still that of a human, but his internal body structure and energy composition had long since left the scope of human beings on Earth. But deep in his soul, he still retained his humanity. But according to Qin Guang's observation of the Protoss, the real gods should not have too many emotions. Even if they did, they could only be emotions that were forcibly solidified in the depths of their hearts to achieve a certain goal. That was not called humanity, but divinity. This meant that the current Qin Guang had the body of a god and the personality of a human. This was obviously very incongruous, and even contradictory and conflicting. For example, the lifespan of a god was usually very long. But even gods of the same level of strength would often differ greatly in terms of their lifespan. If a god was slightly stronger, or if the rules they controlled were slightly different, the difference in the length of their lifespan would usually be several times or even dozens of times. This was not the difference between 10 years and 40 or 50 years, but the difference between hundreds of millions of years and tens of billions of years. The gods were extremely indifferent when it came to emotions. They could easily withstand the impact of emotions and would not feel pain because they had to watch their relatives, friends, or descendants grow old and die. They would also not feel melancholy because the enemy in their life did not lose to them but lost to time. When the lifespan of an intelligent life exceeded a certain limit, it was impossible for emotions that were close to human to survive. Humans, whose average lifespan was less than 80 years, would never be able to understand the philosophy of life of high-level intelligent life in the universe that could easily live for thousands or even tens of thousands of years, let alone gods whose lifespan was easily measured in units of hundreds of millions. Not to mention true eternity, even a life that was close to eternity was completely beyond the understanding of humans. When time was stretched almost indefinitely, many things that were common to ordinary people would slowly become difficult to understand. For example, family, love, friendship, these many emotions that ran through almost everyone's life were very meaningless to the Protoss. In the long history of the endless heavenly realm, Qin Guang felt that it was very likely that only he and Lioli in his previous life had developed feelings that were similar to human feelings for each other. Otherwise, what could explain why Lioli was willing to give up her godly position and be sealed in the heavenly Holy Grail despite being a god emperor like the others? Thinking of this, Qin Guang's mind was once again filled with the image of a person that had completely disappeared for a long time. That's right, it was the deer cry fruit. He did not know when it started, but the huge deer cry fruit was no longer in Cloud City. If he remembered correctly, she should be Lioli's best friend. In the past, Qin Guang did not feel that there was anything wrong with this. But that was because he did not understand the Protoss well enough. Now that he had become a combination of divinity and humanity, and had seen many projections of the Protoss with his own eyes, Qin Guang found something strange. Would the gods really have best friends? Lioli and he were already two anomalies. Now, there was a third anomaly from the heavenly realm, And it just so happened that she was also trapped in the heavenly Holy Grail. Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? Before he could get the answer in his mind, the world in front of Chen Guang suddenly rotated, and he finally and thoroughly descended into the realm in a cup of this mission test. The specific requirements of the mission also appeared in his mind at the same time. It was indeed worthy of being called the realm in a cup of the heavenly Holy Grail. After reaching this level, the strengthening ability provided by the heavenly Holy Grail had completely exceeded the scope of understanding of ordinary humans, just like inner strength. Is this realm in a cup supposed to enhance my creativity? Chen Guang muttered to himself. He felt very strange. In a sense, he felt that the level of the ability of creativity was a little too low, not worthy of the level of the heavenly Holy Grail. After all, as long as one was a normal human being, he or she would more or less have some creativity and inspiration. For example, if a person was asked to take something from a high place and his or her hands could not reach it, he or she could turn around and think of moving a stool at the side. This kind of thing did not need to be taught by others. It was the most basic manifestation of creativity and inspiration. Self-heuristic application of tools was one of the foundations that distinguished human beings from other animals. But in another sense, the scope of application of the ability of creativity was perhaps too wide. For example, in scientific research, when a problem that had puzzled the entire human race for countless years was solved, it would often be a burst of genius inspiration after a long period of accumulation. Going even deeper, if a deity emperor in the endless god realm was given infinite creativity, then whether it was trying to figure out the rules or even trying to touch the laws, it would be useful. Creativity was a simple word, but its effects could be big or small. From small things to big things like the origin of the universe and the principle of planes. This kind of ability appeared in the realm in the fourth cup, which was very unexpected to Chen Guang. Although inner strength was mysterious, it was after all an ability with a definite range and attribute. Even if there was no upper limit to its growth, at least it had a mature system that was easy to understand. But creativity was too big, it could not be quantified, and the effects it could display could also be small or big. But thinking so much was useless in the end. Very soon he found out the first test that he had to face. Create a set of irregular but significant symbols. At this moment, the place where he was standing was no longer an island or a plain like before, but an endless real void. There was nothing, not even the most basic and microscopic particles. For example, the various basic rules that maintain the operation of the universe on Earth, such as the 4 fundamental forces, the limit of the speed of light, the theoretical foundation of the composition of matter, and even the rules of the propagation and diffraction of energy waves, all of these rules that were involved in maintaining the stability of the universe did not exist in this realm in the cup. It was complete and utter nothingness. So the limit of creativity is for me to personally participate in the creation of a plane? Starting from the creation of symbols? Chen Guang muttered to himself, but his mind already had the ready-made memory of the heavenly Holy Grail creating a plane. This kind of thing did not require any creativity at all, right? Suddenly, his heart felt something and his eyes lit up. His right hand trembled irregularly, and a stream of energy that was a combination of divine power, inner strength, the power of the Holy Grail, and mysterious power slowly flowed out from his fingertip, drawing an extremely complicated symbol in the void. This power was very familiar to Chen Guang. When he was in the transition space, this was the power that surged in his body. Chen Guang could understand the first 3 types. Only the last 4th type was completely outside of his knowledge system. He originally thought that after his rebirth, these powers would disappear, and he should have the same pure divine power as the gods, just like the earth element of the earth exploder that completely disappeared after being devoured. But now, it seemed that his judgment was wrong. This mixed power was the most stubborn existence. Previously, he named this mixed power the new version of inner strength, but now it seemed that he had named it wrongly. So, what was the meaning behind this set of symbols? Squinting his eyes, Chen Guang focused on the symbol diagram in front of him. The notification that he had passed the stage had already sounded in his mind, indicating that he had reached the assessment standard of the realm in the cup. He was purely drawing without any conscious thought. If this could be considered creativity, wouldn't it be a little too childish? Chapter 1300. What exactly did I create? I don't even know myself. Alright. Creativity and whatnot? Shouldn't it only count if I create something useful? While he was still complaining in his mind, the second task arrived. Create 2 sets of symbols that have no pattern and are of great significance. If complaining was also a form of cultivation, Chen Guang felt that he had long since surpassed the main gods. Why don't you give me something a little different? The first test had 1 set, the second test had 2 sets, then wouldn't the third test have 3 sets? He raised his hand to draw another set of talismans, and the effect was exactly the same as the first test. Even Chen Guang himself could not understand what he drew, but it just so happened that it was recognized by the realm within a cup. Looking at the 3 piles of symbols floating in the air in front of him, Chen Guang's eyes widened as he stared at them, racking his brains to try and discern some meaning from them. But he quickly gave up on this futile idea. These were all random drawings that he had drawn in a completely unconscious state, and there was no way they could have any real meaning. This situation and this scene even made him question the strictness of the heavenly Holy Grail. If this could be called creativity, then even a newborn could have endless creativity. Could the third test really be, create 3 sets? Alright, you win, I concede. You're clearly using the excuse of creativity to toy with me, aren't you? You say it's creation, but what you're doing is completely meaningless nonsense. It's probably because I've fused with the heavenly Holy Grail, so I've tarnished this great divine weapon? The more Chen Guang thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. But he quickly shook his head violently, indicating that he could not approve of it. Otherwise, wouldn't that mean that he was admitting that he was a fool? This was clearly not harmonious. Just like that, when he drew all the way to the 10th set, there was finally a change. Create a set of compositions that are full of beauty. Chen Guang snapped his fingers. Finally, it was upgraded. If it was in the past, it would be difficult for him to understand what it meant to be full of beauty. However, the present was different from the past. After going through the spirit-seeing sky, one-line sky, and cloud elephant sky, which were interspersed with sketching, oil painting, watercolor painting, traditional Chinese painting, computer graphics, sculpture, relief sculpture, and other arts-related special training, Chen Guang's attainments in art could be said to be number 1 throughout the ages. If he wanted to, he could easily create a painting with just a wave of his hand. If he took it out, it would be comparable to Van Gogh, Da Vinci, Zhang Daqian, Qi Baishe, or even Tang Bohu. Although times were changing and people's preferences and fashions would more or less change, the pursuit of beauty was a concept that had been engraved in human genes since ancient times. Whether a painting was beautiful or not, whether a person was beautiful or not, although there were differences between the East and the West, they were similar in many aspects. Chen Guang even believed that the aesthetics of the Protoss were basically the same as that of humans. The reason was very simple. The god emperors he had met, whether it was Yu Ting or Ba Feng, were all considered handsome. There was no need to mention Liuli's beauty. When he first saw her, Chen Guang, who was still immortal at that time, was almost killed by her beauty. The Protoss had the ability to adjust their appearance. If a god felt that their image was not good, even if it was not a big change, at least a small adjustment would be inevitable. From this, it could be seen that the beauty of a god was basically the same as that of a human. Chen Guang spent at least half an hour thinking in his mind. He raised his hand and used his fingers to surge energy, using lines to draw a perfect combination of the golden ratio and symmetrical Chinese redbud hexagonal shape. Once this picture was released, it would instantly become popular all over the world. Whether it was used to make a logo or as an accompanying picture, it would not be a problem. It could even be directly used as a skill icon in an online game. That would definitely be a design that people would be obsessed with, and people would be crazy enough to copy it. Certification failed. Redeemer, please recompose the picture. 9 chances remaining. When this sentence appeared in his mind, Chen Guang almost thought that he was hallucinating. Isn't this nonsense? Things that I drew blindly past in one try. Something that I took out with a serious composition, and you actually failed to certify it? I don't believe it. I'm the cup now, and I have the final say. You have to let me pass. Then he seriously redrew it again. This time, he chose the six-pointed star, and the result was another certification failure without any suspense. Chen Guang felt a little uncomfortable. For the third time, he thought about it in his mind for a whole 5 hours before he carefully picked up the brush. It took him the equivalent of an entire day in the outside world to take out the finished product. But the moment he put down the brush, he received a notification that the certification had failed. Now, the situation was very awkward. It couldn't be that he failed to draw seriously and could still pass blindly, right? Why don't I give it a try? I'll give it a try. Anyway, there are a total of 7 chances. This time, he simply waved his arms randomly. What he drew was still completely incomprehensible to him, and he did not feel that there was any beauty in it at all. But he actually passed the certification. Chen Guang was silent. Is there something wrong with the aesthetic concept of this heavenly holy grail? I'm clearly slapping myself in the face, okay? Just the things that I've drawn now, not to mention the aesthetics of the Protoss, they don't even touch the aesthetics of the human race. What golden ratio, what symmetrical aesthetics, or otherwise, there isn't even an aesthetic of disorder. In short, it's completely meaningless. Forget it. Since the Holy Grail has gone crazy, then I'll go crazy too. Anyway, it's fine as long as I can pass. It was another very complicated round of aesthetic exploration filled with creativity. After passing 10 rounds in a row, Chen Guang had almost filled the void in front of him. He had to move again. Soon, the third round of creativity appeared. This time, he was asked to draw a 3-dimensional aesthetic structure. Once bitten, twice shy. This time, Chen Guang simply closed his eyes and emptied his mind. His right hand danced wildly in the air as if he was possessed. Then he passed the certification without any suspense. When he completed the 3-dimensional composition again, the task had a little more change. The realm in the cup finally gave him a clear goal, which was to complete a mechanical design. Of course, the requirement was also very simple. It had to conform to aesthetics. At the same time, the machine had to have the function of fetching water. At that time, Chen Guang raised his hand and drew a beautiful faucet. Then the certification failed. Soon, he used the effect of imitating CAD design to draw a stable but unaesthetic water wheel. It was just the shape of a wheel. He didn't expect that he would pass. Chen Guang gradually found the feeling. The so-called full of beauty was simply a pretense. This world of creation was purely messing around. It simply wanted him to fool himself. There was no real creativity. It was purely the graffiti of a 3-year-old. Whether it was flat or 3-dimensional, or even the so-called water wheel or something else, it was no different from graffiti to him now. After the water wheel was the windmill, and after the windmill was the hull. For what felt like an infinite amount of time, Chen Guang constantly drew talismans or drawings in this world that was called the creation realm, but it seemed to have nothing to do with creation at all. It was a rather boring world. Congratulations, Redeemer, for successfully passing the world of creation. Chen Guang had no idea if the sky-piercing Holy Grail was talking to him or if it was just him talking to himself. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. Oh my God! I've unknowingly drawn so many useless things for you? Suddenly, his whole body shook and he muttered to himself, when did I draw this thing? It turned out that the countless energy trace symbols he had drawn were floating in the air in front of him, arranged in a picturesque manner from top to bottom. Standing close, he could not see the whole picture clearly, but when he retreated infinitely far away, and looked around, he could shockingly see that the symbols he had drawn had piled up to form a tree. The shape was lush and layered. It looked like a Christmas tree no matter how he looked at it. How could I draw such a big tree without any meaning? Chen Guang was at a loss. The situation in front of him now reminded him of a hunting video he had seen before. A big hand was holding a pen and pointing on a piece of paper. At first, it was incomprehensible, but when he was done, he pulled the camera away and others could see that he had drawn a portrait of Che Guevara. At this time, this was what Chen Guang felt. The tree in front of him was too realistic, and the details were too accurate. Every symbol and trace he had left before constituted every stroke on the tree. Not only that, if he moved closer and magnified his vision, he could see that the fiber structure in the leaves of the tree was extremely reasonable. The random strokes that he could not understand at all and felt were meaningless could actually be perfectly integrated into the whole of the tree. There were 9 layers of the trunk from top to bottom. This situation was similar to the 9 heavens built into the heavenly Holy Grail. Could it be that this is actually the image of the Holy Grail hidden in the depths of my heart and subconscious? Chen Guang asked and answered his own question, but he did not have an answer. Although he had completed the test on the other side, the creativity realm did not seem to be in a hurry to send him out. Instead, it let him stand in the void and quietly admire his work. Another moment passed, or maybe it was a very long time. The Christmas tree floating in the void began to evolve on its own, as if winter had passed and spring had come, and new leaves were blooming. Not only that, this was originally a completely chaotic void. As the tree evolved, various kinds of elementary particles gradually appeared in the void. The units of these particles were much smaller than quarks. They were born out of thin air, from nothing. The birth of matter brought the arrival of the rules. After the rules evolved and took shape, they began to urge the evolution of matter. This kind of evolution was not biological evolution. Instead, it directly set the combination of a level of elementary particles so that these particles could attract or repel each other, or coiled together to form the particles of the next magnitude. The elementary particles here were not the elementary particles mentioned in the popular science books that Chen Guang read on Earth. They were just the limit of human consciousness, but not the real limit. The real limit should be called the primordial particle. The so-called primordial particle referred to the magnitude closest to nothingness. There was no classification below the primordial particle. Moreover, the distance between the primordial particles was also the true nothingness. Moreover, this particle was neither energy nor matter. It could be a concept, a strand of flux energy, a beam of light, or even a paragraph of words. It could even be a thought in Chen Guang's mind. At that time, the primordial particle had undergone an infinite number of combinations. After crossing an infinite number of magnitudes, the first quark finally began to appear from nothingness. After the quark came the various atoms and molecules in the universe like Earth. The steps to form them were much faster. The enormous tree in front of Chen Guang gradually took shape. It had the shape of a tree. Lush green leaves hung on the branches, reaching the sky and hanging down to the ground. In the middle were white clouds and air. Looking at the so-called heaven and earth continuously growing from the crown and roots of the tree, Chen Guang suddenly understood. This so-called creativity was really about creating a world out of nothing. But what was the meaning of this? This was only the 4th layer. Wasn't it too early? Wait, it seemed like the laws of this plane were still evolving. After the external environment had become the same as Earth's universe, the fusion between the particles did not stop. There were still more characteristics that were constantly being reflected. Chen Guang closed his eyes and simply used his heart to feel. He casually captured a water molecule in the air and looked at the structure of the H20. Suddenly, a layer of energy structure that was completely different from the theory of the universe on Earth was added to the structure of the H20. The water molecule began to flicker, sometimes here, sometimes there. Chen Guang suddenly opened his eyes. The water molecule that he had been observing had unexpectedly disappeared from the universe in front of him. No, it didn't really disappear. Instead, it appeared in an instant 1 year later, but in the blink of an eye, it came back again. The three-dimensional matter had been forcibly added with the nature of time. The dimension of this world of creation was higher than the three-dimensional dimension. He tried to float forward, trying to shorten the distance between him and the enormous tree. But after an unknown amount of time, the distance between him and the enormous tree did not change. It still looked as far as before. This meant that no matter which direction he moved in this dimensional space, it was equivalent to walking on the spot. This was indeed a standard four-dimensional world. But the evolution of this plane was not over yet. Chapter 1301. The development of the matter had far exceeded Qinguang's understanding. With the limited world view and memories in his mind, he could not understand what was happening in the world within the fourth realm of the clear sky cup. Qinguang did not know that even if colored glass, Yu Ting, or even the master god of chaos appeared here, they would not be able to understand the changes that were happening in this small plane, let alone him. Gods could indeed create their own world, and even set up all sorts of complicated rules. Gods could also create infinite dimensions within their own understanding, from 3 dimensions to n dimensions. They could create as many dimensions as they wanted. However, this was only multidimensionality in name. It was a false dimension created with the endless God realm as a foundation and reference, and based on the God realm's own dimension standards. However, the fourth realm in front of Qinguang, the creation realm of the clear sky, was different. From the moment it was born, it used Qinguang's power and the rules that were derived by itself. Although the volume of this world was insignificant, its realm of origin was equivalent to the God realm. However, it was still evolving on its own. The sky and earth that were constantly growing at the top and bottom of the giant tree were the embodiment of the perfect evolution of this world. Qinguang had a vague feeling that the sky and earth would continue to spread into the distance, until an infinite critical point, where the 2 planes that should have been parallel would suddenly close together. When that time came, this strange world would present 2 states. The outer wall of the creation realm was formed by 2 planes, the sky above and the earth below. In the middle stood a giant tree with 9 levels. Then, in the first state, this plane should be flat. However, if the sky and earth were closed, then this plane should be a perfect sphere. Moreover, every point in this plane was in a state of absolute stillness and movement. Just like Qinguang's current physical body, no matter which direction he moved, he would always be in the same place. This plane had both spherical and flat states at the same time. If one wanted to prove that one of the states was wrong, then one had to reach the edge of the plane. However, the location of the edge was, in a true sense, infinitely far away. If a person or a life was in this plane, they would first have to face forever in the same place, then want to reach the boundary of the plane that was infinitely far away. This entire process required one to face 2 concepts of infinity. What is infinity times infinity? Infinity or infinity multiplied by infinity, which is greater? This question alone could not be answered, not to mention that the creation world that Qinguang was in was constantly evolving and perfecting itself. This was not the perfection of quantitative changes, but continuous qualitative changes. Countless tiny qualitative changes were crazily accumulating in every substance, every strand of energy, and every force in this world. Layer after layer of characteristics seemed to appear out of thin air, causing the creation world to become more and more complicated, and its level to become higher and higher. Generally speaking, the 4-dimensional world that people knew of was created by superimposing a 3-dimensional world on a timeline. By increasing the dimensionality of the 3-dimensional water molecules and attaching the property of time to them, the water molecules would become 4-dimensional. For example, when Qinguang was in this plane, no matter if he moved forward or backward, he would have already left his original timeline when he wanted to move. With every step he took, countless copies of himself would appear in the same timeline, forming a long shadow. However, in the end, the materialization result was that he was still in the same place. He was clearly standing in the same place, but when he released his consciousness and wanted to see his back, he could use his gaze to cross the timeline and see himself after a certain period of time. However, the dimension of the creation world was quickly thrown out of the 4-dimensional level and continued to move towards the next stage. If the entire creation world was completely closed, the so-called time would have lost its meaning. In the conventional imagination of humans, The five-dimensional space was formed by countless axis-shaped four-dimensional spaces intertwined together. Each four-dimensional time axis corresponded to a possibility. If there really was a creature that could live in this dimension, then he might be a 3-year-old child in one moment, and in the next moment, due to some needs, he would cross over to the age of 80 to eat breakfast, but in the next moment, he would return to the age of 10 to attend a primary school class. However, such a five-dimensional creature was obviously not continuous and broken. His life logic was chaotic, and his worldview was also broken. This was not a complete creature. However, the current Qin Guang existed in this world that was rising from the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension, and would continue to rise to the next level. In a sense, he was everywhere at this time. Just like folding a piece of paper, 2 points in the two-dimensional world that were extremely far away from each other could instantly overlap. At this time, Qin Guang abruptly existed in this creation world, where the realm and dimension were constantly rising. It was as if he was infinitely folded and replicated in every corner of the creation world. There was only one him here, but there were also infinite him. This kind of infinite existence not only crossed space, but also time and infinite possibilities. In a sense, although the universe where the Earth was located was incomparably huge, according to the law of conservation of mass and energy, before antimatter was really discovered and used, it could be regarded as the energy in the universe was constant and limited. However, the small world that Qin Guang was in now had infinite matter in a real sense, and also infinite energy. This was difficult to understand. For example, there were 2 iron balls made of the same material. One was only the size of a ping pong, while the other was as huge as an aircraft carrier. However, the mass of the ping-pong-sized iron ball was far greater than that of the aircraft carrier. It was logically unreasonable and impossible, but this was an objective fact that could not be denied. As time passed, perhaps only a moment had passed, but it could also be thousands of years. Qin Guang finally sensed that the sky and the earth in the distance had completely closed. At this time, his whole body shook, and his body seemed to melt at this moment. However, he was able to raise his hand and see his palm. At this moment, his own thinking became omniscient and omnipotent, and it was also broken down into every inch of the creation world. At the same time, an immeasurable amount of information emerged in his mind. He obviously did not deliberately look, but at this moment, his eyes seemed to see every inch of the entire space in his eyes and remember it in his heart. His gaze was macroscopic, and he could see the giant tree in the world, but at the same time, it was microscopic, and he could see every most basic particle. At this moment, he could do whatever he wanted. The huge amount of information contained in the entire plane instantly rushed into his mind. If he was still a three-dimensional life, even if the level of science and technology reached the peak of the Earth's universe, it would still not be able to withstand such a huge amount of information. Even if it was just verbal information, if the weight was so large that it was infinite, then even information would have the weight to crush the universe. However, at this moment, he was in this plane, and his whole body was assimilated with the plane. After his rebirth, his body structure looked like a human, but in fact, he had already completely integrated the heavenly Holy Grail into his body. At this moment, he could understand that he was a part of the heavenly Holy Grail, but the heavenly Holy Grail could also be understood as a part of his body. He was in the world within the cup, but the world within the cup was also in his body. This information was originally a part of his body. He withstood this huge amount of information and began to see through the nature of this newly born creation world bit by bit. Suddenly, he vaguely heard a resentful and unwilling roar. He did not know where this roar came from, but it resounded in every corner of the creation world. The roar seemed very resentful and unwilling, dull and distant, and it was filled with extremely complicated emotions. Qin Guang raised his head and looked ahead. In this creation world, other than himself, the other thing that had a real form was, of course, this 9-story tree of unknown origin. No, the origin of this giant tree was very clear, and it was undoubtedly drawn by him, but the subsequent changes were unexpected. There was no doubt that the roar came from the giant tree. This was very magical. My random drawing inexplicably formed this tree, and then this tree should be the culprit that caused the entire creation world to evolve on its own. But in the end, the tree developed feelings, and was actually angry because it was trapped in this creation world? Why did this matter become more and more incomprehensible the more he thought about it? Chen Guang calmed down again, and began to decipher the roar of this tree in his heart. He did not really hear any sound. This roar came from his own omniscient and omnipotent perception. If he really only listened, he was afraid that he would not hear anything. After a long time, he finally finished deciphering the huge, complicated and extremely high-level information contained in the roar, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. Although he did not know what exactly happened, this tree turned out to be an old acquaintance. This was the deer cry fruit that he had not seen for a long time. After she disappeared from Cloud City, he did not know where she went, nor did he know what she was busy with. But now, it seemed that what she did was definitely not a good thing. Otherwise, she would not have ignored him, and would not have roared angrily because she was trapped here. Chen Guang tried to use his own consciousness to actively communicate with the other party, but he failed. Although they were on the same plane and stood in the same dimension, there was a break in the level of consciousness of both parties, and they could not directly communicate. In addition, Chen Guang also realized that Deer Cry did not seem to be able to see him at all, nor did she know that he was standing here. At this time, she was still angry at herself for being trapped here for no reason. Chen Guang vaguely understood that even though the 9-story giant tree was the foundation that caused the evolution of the plane of the world of creation, the authority of the tree itself did not seem to be as high as the soul of the main body of the Holy Grail. Deer Cry, who had transformed into a giant tree, was completely obscured by the incomparably huge data flow in the world of creation. After a while, the rumbling sound of impact came from the position of the giant tree again. It should be Deer Cry trying to break free from inside. But obviously, she could only do so in vain. The level of everything in this world of creation was too high, even higher than the endless divine realm. Chen Guang himself was in the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail was in his body. At the same time, he was in this world of creation, and the world of creation was in his own body. This situation of overlapping and merging allowed him to instantly obtain and absorb all the information in the world of creation, and cast his gaze and consciousness anywhere. His behavior was similar to the primordial spirit leaving the body in Xianxia novels, but at a higher level, because the time in the world of creation at this time seemed to be intertwined chaotically and disorderly. Chen Guang's thoughts not only crossed space, but also crossed time at any time and place. Of course, if one had a strong enough idea and consciousness, and could understand the nature of the world of creation at this time, one could find the law from this disorderly intertwining, and then everything would be orderly. In short, he could let his thoughts wander now, but Deer Cry couldn't. Chen Guang didn't have any intention of saving her at this moment. He couldn't even get close to her. He could only take a look. After waiting for an unknown period of time, Chen Guang suddenly felt a little bloated in his stomach. That's right, there it was again, a very familiar feeling. The first time in the slaughtering world, he let out a colorful fart. Later, after slaughtering the 4 deity emperors of the 4 deities temple for the first time in the true martial realm, he filtered their energy, leaving behind some inexplicable energy. Later, in the transitional space, he fought with Yu Ting and the other deity emperors, as well as one hand of the master god of chaos. At that time, he absorbed and filtered the energy of nearly 1,000 deity emperors, including Yu Ting, as well as the energy that was dispersed in the air after the sacrifice of more than 3 million life god clan members. Before this, Chen Guang didn't know what he had filtered and what was left in his body. He thought that after he came back to life, the inexplicable matter that was left behind should have disappeared long ago, but now it seemed that he was wrong. This kind of energy obviously had the characteristics of crossing time and space, and its dimension was even comparable to the world of creation. The existence of this matter was simply the truth. It didn't need to exist in reality, and it didn't need to be visible or tangible. It only needed to clearly tell others that it existed forever and would never be obliterated, and that it existed along with another existence. Perhaps it was just a sentence, but it was just that unreasonable. Previously, even Qinguang's body had been changed, and his soul was also reborn from nothingness, but the energy from before was so stubbornly and unyieldingly still in his body, and at this moment, it felt like it was about to be released. Puff! A vast and distant sound resounded through the world of creation, as if it was the murmur of the eternal Creator. If there were other living beings in this world, even if it was just a hamster with an undeveloped IQ, it would be able to transform into a powerhouse like a Lord God under the influence of the sound of the great Tao. Chen Guang silently raised his hand and pinched his nose. So do I have to release such high-end technology through farting at such a serious time? Without needing to turn around, Chen Guang only needed to release his consciousness to see the strange energy that was emerging from behind him. Green smoke was rising from where the chrysanthemum was blooming, cough cough. After this energy dissipated, it was evenly distributed to every part of the entire plane at an extremely fast speed, and Chen Guang could see all of this. The world of creation was originally of a very high level, and after integrating this energy, it actually rose to another level. Not only that, but the 9-story giant tree also changed at the same time. Looking at the new fruits on the giant tree, there were even many familiar faces on these fruits. It was actually Yu Ting, Ba Fong, Vesini, the Protoss whose projections had died in the world in the cup. Chen Guang suddenly understood. So that's how it is. So Lu Ming was caught in his own trap? If the gods in the divine realm knew that the most noble principal will in their eyes had actually turned into a spy in order to plot against him, forged Azure's memory, and pretended to be her best friend to rush into the heavenly Holy Grail. Now that she had been captured by him, he really didn't know how they would feel. As for the origin of the energy that he had just dissipated, it was not difficult to understand. This was the highest law controlled by the principal will of the divine realm. In order to let the gods' projections descend into the world in the cup, the principal will divide its own power and laws, and attach them to the gods' projections to protect their projections from crossing the barrier. But when the gods' projections died in the world in the cup, these powers that should have returned to the divine realm were captured by him. So, the source of the whole thing was that Azure and I gave up the divine spark together, gave up the memory of the divine realm, and carried out this plan. Especially myself, I simply reincarnated from zero to Earth. The purpose was to deceive everyone, to lure the principal will to descend, and then to pry into the root of the principal will. I don't remember anything, so the principal will can't pry into my memory. This plan even deceived me, and Azure only knew all kinds of specious things, telling me to pray for my own good, and let everything be controlled by the laws that evolved on their own in the heavenly Holy Grail. The fundamental purpose was to capture this will and its power. After thinking all this through, when Qinguang looked at the giant tree again, his mood was very different from before. It seems that I have to personally compose a sad song for the gods. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.